What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Representing the Resin. My name is Jameson Wellborn, and today we have a very special episode. We are joined by Meltszn. Melty, thank you so much for joining us, man. We appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. It's blessed to be here.
Absolutely, bro. When I threw that little questionnaire out on my story about who, what guest did people want to see coming on the show, you definitely got the most votes. So I think that's super cool. And, we've never actually been able to connect in person, but I'm super, super excited to, hear about your story. And you've definitely made an impact on the Canadian space, east to west. So as we always like to do on the show, we want to start at the beginning. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and where you grew up?
Yeah, sure. So I was born in Windsor, Ontario. Didn't stay there long, moved kind of all over Ontario, probably 7-8 different addresses throughout the childhood, just parents moving around. We didn't have a shit ton of money, so it was kind of, just go where you can, right? Yeah, I moved around Southern Ontario, basically grew up mostly just north of Toronto.
Was that tough for you moving around that much as a kid? Like, I know moves can be really hard for somebody growing up.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you're really young, the only thing you have really is like your little group of friends and your school and whatever. And, we moved around quite a bit. I was lucky. I have a brother. So, I wasn't just like alone in my journey moving around or anything. He's a couple years younger than me. So we kind of just took care of each other and, moved around and did what we had to do. My parents split up when we were 8. So that was like another kind of thing that I guess threw a bit of a wrench into, sticking in the same place and doing the same thing and having a routine. But, we live and we learn and we get through it all.
Absolutely, bro. So like, what were you like in school? What subjects were you more attracted to? Were you sitting at the front of the class? Were you sitting at the back of the class?
I was always like, let's just say I wasn't into school. My teacher's always, oh, you're a smart kid, why don't you just apply yourself and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, because you're just teaching me nothing that I care about. I'm very stubborn. It's hard for me to do things that I don't want to do. There were certain subjects I liked. I enjoyed geography. I enjoyed a little bit of history stuff, some science here and there, but none of it was being delivered to me in a way that was really like resonating. And long story short, I didn't really respect any of those teachers, to be honest. So it was just tough for me to get anything out of that type of learning experience, I guess. I was lucky. I went to a pretty big high school. We had almost 4,000 kids, all different walks of life, and was really lucky to actually have a lot of different opportunities to learn different things at that high school. Some of it I obviously didn't take, fully serious. But there was a lot of like fitness programs and peer mentoring and stuff like that, which I was doing in high school and, got out on time, lucky for me.
What were your interests while you were during that phase of your life?
So I was playing some sports, but I was into cannabis pretty young. Like I definitely was using cannabis all throughout high school and a little bit before, but I wouldn't say my interests were pretty much just, girls and sports and weed. That was kind of what I was into.
That's fair. So like, talk to me about cannabis, being a user and having it in your life all throughout high school. You must have been introduced to it at a pretty young age.
Yeah. So my dad wasn't like an open cannabis user, but I always knew he was kind of doing something, he'd go out to the garage for a bit or whatever. And it's just being a nosy kid, you end up, going through your parents' shit and trying to see what fun stuff they're into and whatever. And I ended up finding, I guess this is probably, I think this was like the summer of 7th grade going into 8th grade, somewhere like that, 12, 13 years old. I ended up finding like this big bag of what I now know of as like sugar leaf in my dad's in his room. And so I, what's this, and my stepdad, I'm kind of jumping all over the place here, but my mom's husband, he kind of let us watch whatever movies he was watching. And sometimes he'd watch like Cheech and Chong or like whatever funny old pop movies and stuff like that. So I kind of knew what it was, but I didn't really know what it was. So I remember, we went in there by myself, kind of busted out this bag. It was all this like green leaf, and I was like, oh, that definitely isn't tobacco, like this must be that weed stuff. Didn't really smell like much. Was kind of just, it was just shitty sugar leaf. And I think what he actually was doing was making some hash out of it, because in that bag was a little tinfoil ball rolled up with this brown kind of gooey substance in this little thing. So I was like, oh, okay, cool. So first time I smoked literally was that day. I went downstairs to the computer. I grabbed some full on like thick fucking printer paper, masking tape, taped up that paper into a joint. I have air quotes of a joint. Yes. And I probably, it was so bad. But I smoked it and I put some of that hash in there because I figured it was all the same thing. I may as well just do the thing right. So I ended up smoking that, a few puffs of what I could kind of get into my lungs. And I remember gagging really hard and like almost throwing up from it, but I was roasted. And I just remember thinking like, oh, he's going to be so pissed when he finds out that I took this. So it kind of fucked my high up and everything that day. But that was basically like the first time where, I kind of got into it. And I didn't smoke every day or anything until probably high school, but that was definitely the first experience. And I was alone. Like I wasn't with anybody. It was just me being a curious kind of bad kid, I guess.
I think it takes a certain type of individual, like a certain type of personality to smoke or do drugs on their own for the first time. Like I grew up with some guys who did that, and I always thought that was wild. Like you did it by yourself. Like, wow, bro. Like for me, it was always like a group thing for a long time. So I think that's super cool. So like, what was the progression like from there? Like, did dad find out right away, or was it just did it turn into nothing?
Oh, it turned into nothing. He never found out. I covered my tracks pretty good. And like I said, it was a pretty big bag of this leafy material. It was definitely not buds or anything. So I doubt he would have even noticed any was missing. Maybe the hash he would have noticed was missing a little bit because there wasn't a huge ball. It was probably like a gram ball of hash or something. So maybe it wasn't, he might have noticed that more than the leaf missing, but I didn't take a whole lot. It was just it was an experiment. And it is, I guess, a certain type of person. I was just always super curious, and nobody was around. I was like, well, I'm not going to not try this thing. So, let's send it.
So, I mean, did it, how quickly did it take till you were, a habitual or daily user?
So I ended up telling a few friends that I tried this thing, and they kind of didn't believe me and whatever. And I was just like, well, okay. And I'm the oldest in my household, so I didn't have anyone older than me to really show me the ropes or anything. But I had a few close friends with older brothers. One of my friends, his brother was kind of trapping a little bit, always had some weed and blah blah blah. And so when I started like smoking with them, it was, oh, this is cool. Like other people like doing this, and this is like it's a social thing, not just like a stay at home and freak out on your own kind of deal. So it was cool. And we kind of started smoking out of like spoon pipes, just like basic glass spoon pipes, little bits at a time here and there. And it wasn't the best weed. I don't know if so I grew up in a place called Barrie, Ontario, and it's just north of Toronto, 45 minutes or so. But back in the like late 90s, early 2000s, one of the biggest like grow up busts happened there. And it was in an old Molson plant, like a Molson brewing plant. And so our city was just flooded with this shitty, like gangster weed, basically. And so that's basically all everybody ever smoked, and didn't smell good. It was really sour. Like, have you ever been to like a Walmart? Like the smell of like the large people that shop there, that's what this weed smelled like. And that's just all we knew. Like there was no skunk, there was no gas. It was just like this sweaty, like shit weed. And so that's what we were smoking. And it wasn't until probably wasn't until I was like 14 or 15 when like we started seeing like decent kush, decent gas, and a few of my buddies started ordering off like bud mail. I don't know if you guys know about bud mail. Like you would just get these crazy strains, and some of them are really cool, some of them weren't. But I'll never forget like the first crazy weed that I probably got. A buddy of mine ordered from bud mail, and he got it, and it came in this like teddy bear, and it was like a teddy bear filled with Kinder Egg. You know the little thing inside the Kinder Egg, the little plastic egg? It was full of those, and those were full of these nugs. And they each had like a little scratch mark on them of like what the strain was, and it was like a super lemon kush, something like to that effect. And it was just pure lemon candy terps, this nug. And it cost me like $40 for this single nug, because obviously there was a risk in getting it there and whatever their markup was. But I'll never forget that, dude, like cracking that thing open and just being like, I was like, oh, what did you like put on this, man? Like there must have been something, you must have put something on this for it to smell like this. And he's like, no, man, I swear I didn't. Like, it's going to burn good. Everything's cool. All right. So we smoked it, and it just was, it was next level. And that's kind of when I actually fell in love, was knowing that it wasn't just this like shit weed that was around. There was actually flavor, and there was actually stuff that could get you more stoned. And
yeah,
it was just a much more happy, overall better experience doing it that way.
Yeah. Once you're shown what something could be, or what the plant could do or could be for you, you know, some of us kind of get very interested and are on somewhat of a never-ending quest to kind of see how far that can go. And it takes that first time to be like, holy cow, it can be this good. If it can be this good, where does it end? Like, what's the top? So I think that's super cool.
How much better could it actually be, right?
Yeah. So what was high school like for you?
Yeah,
did you start cultivating?
I've actually, I'm probably one of the only people on this show that has never grown anything. I've never been a grower. I've never had space to grow. I've never, actually, that's actually a lie. This summer, I popped a seed on my balcony and I let it grow. So if that is the furthest that I've gone into actually cultivating anything. And that was not a cultivation project. That was just a friend of mine brought some flower by. There was one seed in it, and I was like, fuck it. Why not have some fun this summer and just see what a plant looks like when it's growing on my balcony? I've worked in a bunch of grows and, you know, trimmed and obviously bucked plants and done stuff like that, but I've never run a facility or even a tent.
That actually makes it even more interesting. So you know, talk a little bit about that. That was 15, 16. Talk a little bit about high school, and you know, how did that finish up for you, and what were your plans moving forward from there?
Yeah, so in high school, actually, towards the end of high school, everyone started mixing cannabis and tobacco. All my friends were doing it. Everyone was just like, we were doing these things called poppers. I don't know if you've heard of that, or people on here have heard of that, but
I too have my popper phase for sure.
Yeah, so essentially, for those who don't know, a popper is, if you've ever seen one of those acrylic bongs with the little metal slide that pulls in and out, there's a little cone on top of the slide, and you can actually unscrew the cone, and it just is a hole with a rubber like grommet on there, a little stopper. And what we would do is you would cut the end of a cigarette. So it was literally, the hole was a perfect size for a cigarette to fit in. So you would cut a little piece of a cigarette, maybe I don't know, 5 to 6 millimeters off a cigarette, just like a tiny little piece. Stuff it in that hole, and then you would take some ground flour and you would basically just like stamp it on top, so it just had this layer of bud, and then you would have to essentially rip through the flour and the cigarette, pull it into the water, and that was the pop, or the popper. And this was basically crack level cannabis consumption. You know, like you're not feeling anything after you rip one of those through. Your legs go numb, everything's crazy. It's fiendish activities, if I'm being honest. Don't recommend it. Please don't go and try this. It is not the way. But that's what we were doing, and we did that for probably. I mean, I'm sure there's still people doing it now, but I probably did that for 4 or 5 years, and that was like my only method of cannabis consumption for that time. Obviously you get addicted to cigarettes. You're not even filtering them. It's a disgusting habit. But yeah, that was pretty much my consumption at the end of high school. Some blunts here and there, but it was usually a mix of cannabis and tobacco. And again, that was basically just due to, I think, why people started doing that was just due to the quality that was in our area and what we could get our hands on. As far as like finishing off high school, I was still smoking a bunch. Obviously, finished high school, and like I didn't really have plans for college or anything. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And honestly, if you grow up in Ontario, at least at that time, I'm not sure how it is now, but your only options really are you're going to go and work at a restaurant or a factory, or you're going to do some kind of landscaping or something. It's not the land of opportunity. Let's just say that, as far as, starting your own thing up. So that was kind of my future, I guess, was what I thought of my future was going to be.
And so coming out of high school, what was your decision? What was, like, I mean, being faced with that kind of less than ideal pathway, what conclusions had you come to?
So I left high school. I had a job at a factory, was just building cars, like a Honda factory, multiple ones, working through like temp agencies and just shitty jobs, I didn't really know what I could do with a high school education other than that. And it kind of traps you, unfortunately. A lot of people, it traps them because they start making, 20, 25 bucks an hour. They're full time. You're getting all this work and these hours, but it's one of those things where now you go and buy a big truck, and then you buy a big house, and you have a couple of kids and all this shit because you can afford it. But it's like, well, now you're just like stuck in this game of being able to only afford what you can afford based off of this crappy dead end job. So I'd be working at these factories, and I always turned it into a game, like each job, because it's so fucking mundane. It's just like, I can't explain to you, if you've never worked factory work, how boring and just like soul stealing those jobs are. So I'd be just watching these machines go around, and it's like, okay, like if I can make my robot make this many parts in an hour, it's like 3 to 5 more parts an hour than I'm supposed to, then it'll be fun for me. I'm just like creating games to kind of get through the day. And they really didn't like that. The factory workers, they were not into that. So I ended up getting fired from a couple of those jobs just because I was actually making too many parts. And I was having downtime, and they just weren't into that. So I was like, well, this is fucking stupid. I'm done with this. Like, can't be here. I just need to get out. So I actually met my partner at a factory. She was working at one of the same plants that I was, and we just ended up, kicking it off. And basically, I'd say 6 months after we met or so, we just decided, like, we got to get out of here. Like, this place it's not it. And then we came out west.
And so what was that? Did you have anybody out west? Did you know anybody out west, or was it a complete and just utter trust fall into, we need something new and we want to change?
Oh, it was a complete trust fall. We sold all our shit. I didn't have any, like, we sold our cars, sold all of our stuff. Basically, we came out here with suitcases. We lived at a hotel for a week until we found like a place to live. Like, we didn't have anything. I didn't have any friends out here. I do have an uncle and a few cousins on Vancouver Island, but I'm in Vancouver. So it's like we weren't, and I don't drive. So it's like we weren't really seeing each other very much. I didn't have any connections out here. There was no, it was just a new place and a fresh start. And I always wanted to come out west at some point. So I figured, why not?
Very cool. So, I mean, you get out west, you get to Vancouver. Did you drive or did you fly?
We flew out. So yeah, like I said, we sold our cars. Like, we didn't have anything. We just came out here with clothes on our backs and our suitcases, basically a suitcase each and a backpack. And, you know, we didn't even have an apartment set up or anything. We were just running around, just trying to figure it out.
Was cannabis in your head as far as something that you wanted to get involved in, or was it just kind of getting settled first and then seeing what comes later?
Cannabis was always like, cannabis has always been a thing in my life. Like, as you know, since that point of obviously smoking that gnarly tape joint, that was basically like, I never thought like, oh, I'm gonna go and like start a brand or like do some shit. I just didn't even know. I didn't really know anything other than I had a few friends that sold weed and that was cool and I liked smoking it, but I didn't really plan on joining the cannabis industry, I guess, when I moved out here.
Okay.
But it was something I knew that it was like a thing out here way more than it was back home. And I was excited to explore at least, go try dispensaries and smoke in public and all these things that like we just never really could do back home.
So, I mean, what was your first year like here? You got situated, and what was the first few months like?
Yeah, so we came out. My girl, actually, I was basically her backpack. She had more money than me. She had basically kept us going for a little while. I essentially went and got a job at like Starbucks, worked there for a little while. I just hated it. I couldn't like I just can't be in those kind of situations where I'm just like stuck in a place and I can't leave and like I'm like a wild animal, you know what I mean? You can't hold me in this little spot. I can't do that. So worked there for a little bit, hated that. I actually quit that job maybe 2 weeks after I got it. And then I went and I found a job in a mall here downtown selling eyewear. So I went from like being a Starbucks employee to wearing like a 3-piece suit and walking around and selling people all these expensive glasses and fitting people and doing all these things. And yeah, it was just like one of those jobs where I was like, okay, I'm making better money here. And like, I'm not kind of just like making coffee all day and kind of just slaving away for pennies. Not that I was getting paid a whole lot at the eyewear spot, but it was definitely better. And I got a little bit of commission if I sold things well. And so I ended up basically moving up the ranks in that organization. Ended up being offered my own store. I was a really good salesman there. I've sold a shit ton of glasses for them. And eventually they were like, hey, like we want you to like step up and come and run a store. And I was already at the point where I was like, man, this is just not what I want to do. And the point where I realized that was, again, I'm wearing a 3-piece suit to work, but when I would come in to pick my paychecks up, I would just wear my regular street clothes and I'd have all the loss prevention guys like following me around the mall. And I was like, yo, it's me. Like, like it's the same guy. And sorry, man, sorry. And I'm like, yo, that's kind of messed up, man. Like, I don't really like feeling that way when I come in here. And like, I don't know, I don't think I look like some creep or anything, but they were watching me for sure. And yeah, wasn't into that. So they offered me the store, and as soon as I kind of saw that, I kind of pictured my future of like running a sunglasses store, and I was just like, this just does not sound fun at all to me. So I went and I actually applied at a bong store. And I just randomly saw it on Instagram. They were just like, oh, we're hiring, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, fuck it, I'll go in there, see what I can do. And being a salesman already, I went in. It was a pretty busy day for them. And I ended up selling this guy like a $1,600 bong in line waiting to like hand my resume in. And the guy behind the counter is like, what the hell, man? Like, you want a job here? And I was just like, oh, yeah. Like, that's kind of why I showed up actually today. And so gave him my resume. He basically hired me on the spot. And I went back to the sunglass place, gave them a month notice because I knew it would be tough to train somebody, find someone to replace me or whatever, like right away. So I kind of gave them a bit of extra leeway and I was just out of there.
Damn, that's crazy. That's cool. And I mean, when things fall into place like that with coincidence, it's hard to say no. That's super cool. So, I mean, what'd your girl think about the move from, here's a managing your own store to I'm going to go on as a salesman at this head shop?
Well, neither of us are like super materialistic people. You know, like we're not, money is not the thing that like drives me forward in life. Money's cool. Obviously you need it to do lots of things. You need to do everything, right? But I find the singular pursuit of money to just be kind of exhausting, and there's no fun. Like I'm fun based. I want to have fun at my job. I want to have fun in life. And if I'm not doing that, you couldn't pay me, you know, an X amount of money to not continue to have fun. So she was pretty cool with it, honestly, and she had a decent job. Actually, she was just starting school, just started to go to school for baking, I think, around that time. So she went through her old pastry baking arts classes and got certified and all that good stuff. But essentially, yeah, she was just like, whatever, you know, you got a job, you can still pay the bills. Like, I don't care. Like, you know, go work wherever you want. So it was pretty chill.
Very cool. So what was that job like?
At the bong store, it was cool, man. Like, that's kind of where I fell in love with hash. Again, I had smoked a bit of hash back home, just like Lebanese stuff, Kabul, like different Middle Eastern, like traditional hashish, and I always loved it more than cannabis. It was less harsh. The high was cleaner. I just always enjoyed it more. And this guy used to come in, and he had a little dispensary out of his house, like a little trap, but it was like a cool thing. So he would play like jazz music there, and they were only open like certain times of the week, and like it was like this kind of vibey little spot near Commercial Drive. So he would come in once a week or once every 2 weeks, and he would just come in and like restock on papers and restock on all whatever he needed for his little shop and baggies, and sometimes he'd get some pipes and whatever. But he'd always bring us like this, you know, like a good hefty bag with like a half ounce of flour, different kinds of flour in it, different kinds of hash and shatter and edibles and all these things. And I was like, oh man, this is dope, you know. I could bet there's like more of this stuff out there, different kinds of flavors, and he always had different flavors of flour and hash and everything. So I was like, oh, this is really cool. I want to learn. I just want to learn about this stuff. So basically, my entire life at that bong store was just like cleaning glass. You know, you're cleaning dust off stuff, you're reorganizing, whatever. So I would always just have like the CCC 420 was a YouTube channel back then. I think they're under a different name now, but it was a YouTube channel, and these guys would just do like reviews on different strains, different types of lacs, different full melts, all these things from the States, California, Colorado. And they had cool glass on there and everything. And like, that's kind of where I fell in love with the culture, was actually like watching these guys and being like, oh man, like they're doing these Jermichael techs, you know, like that's the stage where I'm coming from, is like Jermichael days. So when I see that, I'm just like, oh man, like this stuff looks so cool. And they got their nails, their e-nails on, and you can see the hash just like bubbling away on these screens. And it was just like, oh man, I got to find that. So that kind of pursued my pursuit of basically going to every dispensary in Vancouver, trying to find full melt hash that I could dab. And there was none. There was literally nowhere I could go. So we decided, well, I guess I got to figure out how to make this shit.
And so that was the true spark on your journey, you know, was basically seeing it, knowing that it's attainable, not having access to it, and then making the decision to source it yourself.
Yeah, basically, I was just obsessed. I wanted to find this stuff so bad because I wanted to know what it was like. I was smoking BHO and shatter at the time. To go back a little bit, actually, that's how I got off of poppers. A friend of mine, he had come by with this like 3-foot like Illadelph Build-A-Bong with all these chambers and all this crazy shit, and I was like, oh my god, like this thing's crazy. And then he pulled out this little titanium like nail, and I was like, what's that for? And he said, oh, we're gonna take some dabs. And I had never even heard that term before. I didn't really know like what that was, and this was before I worked at the bong store, by the way. So he showed me shatter for the first time, and he had a few dispensary cards, and he was he always had like 6 or 8 different flavors from different producers and different stuff. And I remember I took my first dab of shatter, and it probably wasn't that big, but it was red hot. Like there was no cooling the nail down. We didn't know anything about any of that at that point. So we're just taking screamers off these nails, and I think I coughed for like maybe 30 minutes after after that first blast, and I was like, oh, I'll literally never need to smoke a popper again in my life. I threw my cigarettes out, threw the popper piece out, threw the bong. I was like, this is way better. Like, you know, I've never been this high in my life. Like, this is just like, this is it. Smoked shatter for probably like 2 years before any of that. Shatter and live resin. And yeah, it was cool. Like, you could just go to the store, man. Like, I live by an Eden Medicinal Society. You could walk in there. They'd sell you half grams or quarter grams of anything you wanted to try. And like, I would just go in there every morning and buy like my dabs for the day. And it would just be something different. Must have tried 300-400 strains during that time, wrote them all down in this little book. And like, you know, I was just like completely nerding out over this culture. And it was a shock. Like I had never experienced anything like that. So yeah, sorry, I forget your original question. I kind of went down a rabbit hole there, but.
No. We were talking about, you know, you seeing full melt and being on that quest and not being able to attain it in any of these head shops. But I think it's really good you kind of gave us that background of, you know, first dabs and being that guy making those notes, trying those different flavors. Like it definitely added to it. So I think that was super valuable. But yeah, like, you know, we were discussing the moment, I think, at which you looked into or launched your hash making journey, which was born out of not having access to what you were seeing on the CCC, which was Jermichael tech, which was putting loose resin heads on top of a screen and then applying gentle amounts of heat and seeing how much residue was left on that screen and smoking the resin. So I think that the question is, you know, was that when you launched into your hash making career, or had you experimented prior with washing heads?
No, that was the beginning. So at that bong store, I was working there with a few other people, and maybe 5 or 6 months after I had started working there, he was looking for another employee to come in. And I remember this guy came in with his girlfriend, and basically handed in his resume, and he got a job. And we'll call him B. I'm not going to say anyone's like real names or anything on here, but we'll call him B. And he was basically the guy that helped. I would say that without his kind of push, maybe it would have never started at all. He already had like a little program going where he was sending some packs back home and, you know, whatever for his family and making a little extra money on the side. And I wasn't doing anything. Like I was not involved at all in cannabis other than selling basically just the accessories at that time. So he was the one where I started showing him these videos, and he's just like, "Oh, that shit looks crazy, bro. Like, where do we buy that?" And I'm like, "Dude, I've been trying to buy this shit, man. Like, it is impossible. Like, I've been going around to every dispensary. They say they got bubble hash. They say they got this and that, and none of them have anything." So he was like, "Well, fuck. Like, what do we need?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know. Bag set, you know, maybe a little washing machine, and that's kind of all I know really at this point." And he's like, "All right." So he bought the first set of bags we used. They were bolt bags, I think. 1 gal bolt bags, or maybe 5 gal bolt bags, whatever they were tiny, little tiny bags. And yeah, we just started like fucking around and washing in his little apartment. And the very first time we washed, I soon learned how allergic I was to cannabis and monoterpenes, which I didn't know at the time that's what it was, but that is my theory today of my main allergy being monoterpenes. The super, super volatile ones that come off in the water. I never had a problem being in a grow. I never had a problem smoking. I've never had asthma growing up, nothing. Like I was always breathing pretty good. And I was considering going to the hospital after the first night of washing hash. It just closed my airways up completely. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Like, it was really, really tough. But we kind of just pushed through it, and I was wearing like fucking painting masks, like, you know, COVID basically painting masks, like just thinking, oh, this is fine, whatever, you know, it's all good. And I probably made, I don't know, probably did that for a year and a half before I was like, okay, I need to like figure this out, actually like find some proper PPE to use, because I just can't do this anymore. Yeah, so we were watching in his apartment, and first couple of runs, the first run actually came out pretty good. You know, we were using the old shitty cardboard box tech to dry our stuff up, which is horrible. I would not recommend anyone ever does that, but that's what we were using. That's what we knew of tech wise. So we were doing that, and it actually the first melt we made actually bubbled and melted kind of well. Like, it wasn't full melt by any means, but it was way better than anything I'd ever seen from the stores or anything like that. So we kind of were like, all right, we got something here. Like, you know, we're not idiots, whatever. And of course, you do it all nice and gentle the first time because you don't know what you're doing. And the second time, we pull the drill out with the spoon, and we're just beating the shit out of this weed. And it was just, we tried so many different ways to do it, and it always just came back to just being as gentle as we could. And, you know, people, I think, try to just do way too much. And hash is one of those things, especially full melt hash is one of those things where the more you do, the worse it's going to be.
So did you scale up in your process? Like, was it a slippery slope into, okay, let's find more material and do more of this?
So actually, we were really, really my whole story is just like luck based, honestly. We had some friends that had access to material, and they were making a little bit of hash at the time, but not really like trying to be hash makers. They were just doing it for fun. And he would bring us, you know, we'd get a little knock on the door in the morning, and there'd be a half piece sitting there of some whatever flower that either didn't go or whatever. And it was just like, fuck yeah, like, we're going to spin this tonight. It's going to be sick. It was always different strains and different gear and whatever. And so we kind of got like a little bit of a free tuition into hash making to try out things. And we'd always give Buddy half the gear back or whatever. And just like, you know, it was just a fun experiment for us to just kind of learn and try. And eventually we started getting a little bit better at doing it. And we actually reached out. I actually reached out to one of the companies I knew that was a BHO company. And I was like, hey man, like, you should come and buy your butane from the store I work at. Like, maybe we can chop it up and hang out or whatever, but like, I'm sure I can get you a better deal on butane than wherever you're buying it right now, kind of thing. So he was like, okay, cool. He pulled up, and I showed him some of the hash, and he was like, what the fuck is this? Like, never seen anything like this before. And this was all air dried. You know, this is like 2014, 2013, 2014, something like that. So it was all air dried. There was no freeze dryers. There was no rosin at that time. Like, this was just the heads. It's all we knew about. And so he was like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like, I'm going to show this to my partner. Would you guys be interested in like having a meeting? I'm like, fuck yeah, we're interested, man. Like, you know, I don't want to work here forever. Like, let's see what's up. So basically showed him that product. A week later, he came down. I had B come over, my partner. We came over to the spot. We had a little session. They basically offered us a job of like, do you guys want to come do this for us? And we were like, I mean, yeah. Like, I couldn't imagine a better situation. So we made a little deal, a little agreement, and I basically quit my job, and so did he, because we were both working at that bong store. Quit our jobs, and we ventured out to the valley and started whipping hash.
That's awesome. I mean, were you just in it like volume, and you just had as much access to as much material as you wanted, and it was go time, or what did that look like?
Well, so I approached it as basically like we were like janitors. You know, you've got all this material, and they were growing at the time and making BHO and like quite a bit. And so I was like, hey, like, any of the smalls, any of the sugar trim, any of that shit, like, we can clean that up and like turn it into something worth selling. And he's like, oh, okay. Like, I thought you guys needed full buds and like packs and all this shit. And I was like, well, that's better, but I mean, we can still work with this stuff. And so again, it was kind of another free tuition where I was getting essentially paid to learn more and more and more as we were going. So, you know, at first we weren't doing a whole lot because obviously these guys' money, and you know, we weren't trying to. We still didn't even really have outs for any of it. It was just a passion R&D project, and shout out to those guys for really believing in us. And like I said, there was no solventless brand around. Like, you couldn't buy solventless. There was just like traditional hash or BHO. So that's kind of where I saw the opportunity, is like, we could kind of be like the first people to really like drop something to market, go to dispensaries. We had a few connections with that, and just see where it went and if people would want to buy it. And it was tough at first, honestly. Like, we'd have to cuff everything up front. Dispensary owners, they didn't know what the shit was really. When we smoked it with them, they'd get real high and be like, oh, this is crazy. But it was still a shatter dominated world and a live resin dominated world. People just weren't expecting, you know, orangey amber trichome heads, caviar in a jar. They didn't even know what that was.
So how long did it take for you to push that prerogative or push the solventless, the air dried resin until you started to see that?
Yeah, it probably took 3 to 6 months, I would say, for us to like have consistent people rebuying. Like, oh, we go drop an ounce off, and like, okay, it would take a couple of weeks, but then like, oh, we actually ran out of that stuff. Like, do you guys have any more? And you're fucking right, we do. All right, show up. Here's the next batch, you know. But we had to do a lot, man. Like, we had to give away so much product. We used to throw. So the company that I was working with was West Coast Collective. For those who have been around a while, you would know that brand probably, from BHO to edibles to, you know, hash, obviously. And what we would do is we would go and we would basically take over a lounge on Wednesdays. We'd have West Coast Wednesdays. And we'd bring a bunch of our products, all the best shit we had, and anyone could come and dab it and try it. And it was just like it was a cool kind of social experiment to see if we could actually convert people. And eventually people started converting, and they started moving over, and they started asking us for products, and they started looking for new flavors. And then it was just one of those things that kind of just grew on its own, from word of mouth. It was beautiful. I think you're muted there, brother.
Yeah, that's very cool.
I think you're muted there.
I think what happened in British Columbia and, you know, Vancouver just was very, very special during that time. What happened next? You continued to wash material. The market continued to catch on. Were you playing it all with any fresh frozen material at that point, or did that come much later?
Oh no, we started basically with fresh frozen. When I was doing it in Homie's, when I started doing it in Homie's apartment, we were not using fresh frozen. We didn't have the access. We didn't have any of that stuff. But these guys were already running live resin when we signed up, so they had frozen material. They had freezer space. Like, we were able to do that. And watching the CCC and all that, it was easy to see that was the way to go. And it makes sense, right? Like, why would you want a degraded product to start with? Like, I would rather be the one that controls how cured something gets and how fresh something is, you know, instead of being like, well, here's this dry material. And also at that time, dry material, like, nobody was going to take care of material the way that you needed them to in order to make the best hash. It just wasn't happening. It was very money driven back then. Everyone was just trying to make money, you know, flip shatter and do all this stuff, right? So it was more of like a quality issue than anything, I think. You can definitely make great hashish with like dried and cured products. There's no doubt about that. I've smoked it. It's a phenomenal product. But as far as making it easy on ourselves, I would say that the fresh frozen was definitely beneficial.
So what happened next? How long were you in that partnership working in the Valley, producing at scale like that?
Yeah, so that was probably, there was times where we'd run up to like 30 pounds in a month, like fresh pounds, which was a lot for two guys to be whipping. It was just it was a lot of work, and especially for someone like me who's can't breathe while they're doing it, it took a toll on my health for sure. We probably did that for 2.5, 3 years, I would say. And the group that I was with, they kind of had set their sights on going out east and trying to start something out up there. And I came from out east. I was like, I'm not fucking going back there, boys. Like, I appreciate it and everything, but like, there's no way I'm moving back there. Like, there's a 0% chance that that's going to happen. And, if that means that we got to split up or, aren't going to work together as much anymore, then so be it. And I'm fine with that. And they're fine with that. And everything was cool. So they went out east and I kind of stayed here. Luckily at that time, we had met this guy and he offered us a spot under his mum room. So he had a big mum facility out here, and he offered us a spot where we could wash in the city and be a little bit closer to home instead of having to drive all the way to the Valley all the time because we're in the city, which was perfect. So he cleaned out this like boiler room for us and repainted it and everything. And we got our little stainless steel table set up and our washers and everything cool. And it was all set up and it was like this dream little situation, except that it would never get that cold. Again, we're under like a 200 room or a 200 light mum facility. So it's just like, there's a lot of heat going on, but we're underground. So it's not like it's super hot, but it wasn't anywhere near what a legal cold room would be at right now. We were probably operating in like the high 50s, honestly, temperature wise down there. And this was a time where rosin had just come out. Everyone was into rosin and like, this is cool, and flower rosin and all this stuff. And again, it was just a pivot. We had to figure out like, bro, I used to have to make rosin look like shatter for people to buy it. So I'd have to like muffin it out in the oven for like a minute just to like get it to raise up, and then like heat gun it down so it had all the holes and everything. And people were like, oh, this is fucking crazy. Look at this shit. And I'm like, this is the same shit I was trying to sell you 2 months ago. And like, it just looked like shatter now. So you guys are hyped about it? Like, all right. It's so funny, man. The game is so funny.
Were you an early adopter?
So yeah, I did that for a little while.
Were you an early adopter of rosin?
Go ahead. Oh man, I can remember B and I that night that I guess it wasn't that night. It was maybe the next day that Sal, Soil Grown, went on Hash Church and explained rosin tech to everybody. And I remember I told B after work, I was like, yo, come over. I got some crazy shit to show you. He's like, all right. So he came over and we were sitting here and I had my girl's hair straightener and one of those buds from Homie that used to drop that stuff off to us at the bong store for his little discount. And we squished out this nug into some parchment paper, and you hear the little sizzle and whatever. And we peeled open the shit, and there was just oil everywhere. Like, it was a really good strain, obviously. I don't remember what it was, but it was something really. It might have been like a shishka berry or something, but it squished like crazy. And we peeled the little rosin chip out and scraped it all up and smoked it. And I got higher than I'd ever been from shatter, ever from any BHO product, and it just roasted me. And it lasted a really long time. And we were just laughing. Like, it was like 2 a.m. And I remember my girl was like all pissed because we were like just being loud out here laughing and just like being idiots because we just like, it was like someone showing you how to fish for the first time. You're like, holy shit. So we started making a lot of flower rosin and just doing all that stuff, right? We were just kind of making everything. But hash was I always thought hash was more valuable as raw trichomes. Like, I wasn't really super into squishing hash into rosin because I was like, I want to smoke melt. I really liked the flower rosin as it was, and I really liked the hash as it was, but we just hadn't really dialed in our tech for squishing the hash into the way that it was like going to be the best it could be. And that obviously takes a lot of time and R&D and whatever, and we didn't have anyone showing us what to do, so it was kind of just figure it out. So yeah, that was really cool. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention someone else too, the homie Phil from True Genetics. He was integral as well in our startup, as he was helping grow at that at West Coast. He was helping grow, and he was already making hash and kind of knew the in and outs, and he gave us a few really good tips as well. So definitely shout out to him.
Very cool, man. So I mean, you're on pretty much the cutting edge of flower rosin, and you're still playing, you know, very heavily with live hash rosin. You know, what happened next? Like, this is, you know, what came next for you?
So yeah, like I said, they went out east, started up another thing, and everything was cool. I was lucky enough that those machines, the freeze dryer and we had the first freeze dryer, as far as I know, the first freeze dryer in Canada. We had the old pharmaceutical one with the 4 shelves. It was like $15K US. Like, it was this crazy thing, and it didn't work at all. Like, it didn't work at all. So yeah, they had to ship us another one, and we had to take the parts from that and mix them all together and do all this extra bullshit just to get them to work. And I was like, fuck, man, like, this thing was supposed to be like, this was supposed to make shit easier, like, I didn't know I had to be like some crazy lab tech to like understand this pharmaceutical freeze dryer. Like, it was like the original ones were crazy. I don't know if you ever used one of the first ones, but like, each shelf temp was different. You had to like know the ramp cycles and like there was no just like turn it on and set it, like let it go. You had to do all this extra shit through the back end to like make each thing do what you wanted it to do. And it was crazy. And like I said, I'm not educated like that. Like, I'm not a tech person. Like, I don't know any of that shit. So you have to learn kind of on your feet. And luckily the techs at Harvest Right, they really did help us out a lot. I know a lot of people have, good and bad experiences with them, but the original guys that were helping us out, they truly helped us get through it and make it work. But yeah, so the boys went out east, and then I kind of just started doing processing for whoever wanted it. That's when I linked up with Kind Selections, was doing a lot of stuff for him, did some stuff with Temple, did some stuff with just a few other guys, and it was cool. Like, it was kind of the dream. I had my own lab. I was kind of had the keys. I was going in whenever I wanted. It was dope. It was really cool. And I've always just been that. Like, I've always been a lab guy. So that was my biggest downfall, I think, was being from that world of like sales. I was like, man, I fucking hate that world. I just like, put me in the lab, let me put on a podcast, and I'll just sit down there for 15 hours and just get my work done and do whatever I want. Just be alone and, be on my own and get things done. And basically, I had to go and like reform all these relationships now with all these dispensaries and all these things, because I wasn't the one going and dropping our products off before. I would be there sometimes, but like, that wasn't my main job. I was the lab guy. So that was pretty cool. You got to meet a bunch of people. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Is this the birth of Meltszn at this point? Like,
yeah. So Meltszn. Well, at first I didn't have my own brand. I was still labeling everything with the West Coast jars. And I mean, it was basically the same. Like, I was making the hash before, I'm making it now. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like it's any different. I just didn't really have designs on like, oh, I'm going to make my own thing and like whatever. I was just kind of letting it happen the way that it was happening. I kind of always done that. I've just been, when things happen organically, they always happen the best. I don't like to force anything. I've never been somebody that's like trying to be pushy or, make shit happen that way. Cause I don't know. I hate when people approach me like that. So I don't like to approach people in that same manner. But yeah, I definitely started, I guess Meltszn started, I started hashtagging stuff Meltszn for a while, but it wasn't like my brand. That was probably I would say at the beginning of 2017 that started. Like, Meltszn was like a brand. And that was cool. Like, it was cool to like have my own labels. It was cool to have my own jar and everything. And I kind of took, shout out to Matt Rise. I took kind of a tab out of his book where I don't know if you've seen his old jars, but they were like, it said ice wax on them, and it was like in this like shitty, like looked like a 5-year-old kind of scribbled it on there. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. So I didn't make stickers for my brand. There are no Meltszn stickers. Like, that doesn't exist. I always signed every jar Meltszn, like on top. And I was like, this is kind of like a cool little personal touch. Like, it was obviously to save a bit of money as well. Like, you know, I didn't, people think making hash is like some like luxurious lifestyle. You're not getting rich if all you do is make hash. Trust me, it's not going to happen. So that was kind of cool. And I like having my own little personal touch with like my signature on top of the jars. And shout out to Matt Rise for that, because I definitely took that from him.
How long were you working with a freeze dryer before they became more regular in labs across Canada?
I mean, as soon as Fletch started talking about them, or Archive started talking about freeze dryers on Hash Church back in the day, we just got one right away.
Yeah.
I don't know of anybody that had them before us.
How long?
Not to say that there wasn't, but that was probably 20. Geez, that must have been end of 2014, at beginning of 2015, maybe.
And once you got the unit working, how many cycles did you have to run before you felt as though you were pulling out something that you were proud of?
Oh, it didn't take very long. The main thing that I really liked about the freeze dryer was I could turn things around in 24 hours. There wasn't like, you could give me a bag of fresh frozen, let's say at noon on Friday, and at the latest Sunday morning you could come get it, you know? So it was really good for just speeding the process up, because until then we were just air drying everything on baking racks and like coming in every couple hours and scraping up the resin and redistributing it and like making sure everything was dry and not sticking together and the airflow was okay. And it's a lot of work to air dry, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for anyone that's still doing that, because it's truly a labor of love. There's no reason to be doing that anymore other than you just love it, you know?
So,
but yeah, we probably like 10 batches, I'd say, maybe like 7 to 10 batches before we were like, oh, this is it. We figured it out. We didn't dry it too long. We didn't dry it not enough. Like, it was how we wanted it. It fell through the sieve perfectly. Like, it was just very, very, it was simple at that point, I guess. And maybe that's just, we just did so many runs with it that it just became simple. But I think we messed around a little bit with the temperatures and the drying times and how much material went on each tray. And, you know, there's just a few little things that we had to kind of work out, I guess, to make it actually efficient.
So was it you going store to store to establish your brand once you decided to move forward with Meltszn as a brand and more than a hashtag?
Oh yeah. So yeah, I didn't even mention that. Basically, I had the Meltszn name kind of in my head, and the idea of that actually came from one of the guys that was working with the boys out east. His tag was barbecue season, and I was like, oh, that's dope. Like, you know, I just liked it. I liked it. It was like short. It was kind of like, if you're not really into hip hop or like even from Toronto at that time, you didn't know what SZN was. Like, Top Season was, I think, like a clothing line that had kind of started in Toronto and was one of these things that was, you would start to see Top Season everywhere. Top Season. And I was like, oh, I just liked how it like visually looked, SZN. And I remember having a conversation with the homie, and he was just like, with barbecue season, and he was like, oh, I was like, where'd you get that from, you know? And he's just like, oh, it's always barbecue season, man. You know, like, he just loved eating barbecue. So I was like, yo, that's dope, dude. Like, I love that. And then I was just like, well, you know, in my life, like, it's always melt season, because I've always loved melt, and I always love making melt and smoking melt. And I was like, this is perfect. So started hashtagging my shit that for, I don't know, maybe a month or so, maybe 2 months before I actually like reached out to somebody and I just put a link out on the internet, basically on my Instagram, being like, hey, can anyone make me a logo? Because I'm not, again, I'm an idiot. So Smoking Room Only is the guy who created the logo for me. I basically had already had the idea of how I wanted to look and the font and everything, but he kind of just put it together for me as like a PDF and all that good stuff. So shout out to him. And yeah, it was just one of those things where I was just like, yeah, this is kind of cool. Like I like the way it looks, and why not have my own brand, and why not represent myself, and just kind of, just step out of the shadows of a bigger brand that was already doing really good things, and people respected and everything. But it was kind of time for me to just do my own thing.
Did that create any type of strain, or was that just a very easy parting and mutual evolution?
Oh, it was very easy. Like I still made hash for West Coast for years after that. I just also had my own brand. So like I said, like everything was very amicable how we left things off. Like there was no bad blood. Like everything was super cool. They just wanted to go somewhere that I didn't want to be, and it was all good. And I wasn't like, by any means, I wasn't like a huge part of their organization or anything. I was just the guy whipping hash in the basement. When it was available to do. So I don't think there was any bad blood or any issues at all with that. And I did continue to make products for them as well.
So what happened? I said absolutely, of course not. Like, there was no insinuation of any bad blood. Just when new brands and new companies emerge, and sometimes those relationships are strained a little bit, but it's good to hear that one wasn't. But yeah, I mean, what came next when you're running your brand, you're getting into the dispensaries, you're visiting them yourself to get your name out there? Like, was that difficult? Did you end up bringing somebody on to take care of that so you could focus more time in the lab?
Oh no, I've always been a one-man army. I just really like to have control over all aspects of my business. Like I want to know that every gram that goes into a jar is a gram. I don't want anyone getting a 0.96. I don't want anyone getting a 0.9. I don't want anyone getting a hair or a piece of fluff or something in a jar. Like that to me is like, that's nightmare shit. Like I can't deal with that. So I need to make sure that everything is exactly the way that I want it to be. And I kept everything really small. I wasn't making huge drops. Like there was never hundreds of grams of Meltszn available. It just wasn't a thing. And again, I was only one guy in the lab. I'm the guy getting the ice. I'm the guy getting the jars. I'm the guy going to the dispensaries. I'm the guy transporting everything. I'm the guy who's jarring everything up and writing on the jars and writing on the labels. And it's just, I take a lot of pride in just knowing that if there's a problem, I can't blame anybody else. It's all on me. So for me, that was really important. And yeah, it's a lot of work, like running around. And again, for me, like I don't drive, so I'm hopping in cabs. I'm running across town, all these different dispensaries and meeting people and doing all this stuff. And I did have some, like I said, I wasn't never going on those meetings and meeting people, but mostly my job was in the lab. So shout out to THC, shout out to Sunrise, shout out to Eden, Canna Clinic. Like there was a ton of dispensaries that just knew me personally, and we're like, okay, like I don't have to like vet this guy. We know this guy's legit. The products are legit. Like it wasn't hard in that sense. The hard part was finding enough hours in the day to just get to all those places and meet all those people and make sure everyone was still happy at the end of the day, and make sure I didn't forget anybody, because again, there just wasn't ever that much product.
Were you moving through a lot of different varietals, or were there certain varietals that you had large amounts of material to work through that kind of stuck out as favorites throughout those years?
I mean, there was obviously like cookie cuts that were around, but nobody, if you say that that your cookie cut is for sure the cookie cut or whatever up here during that time, like I call bullshit. Like there was a million different kinds of cookies up here. Like, and they were probably only 4 or 5 different kinds of cookies, but everyone grew it a little differently. Everyone had different inputs. Everyone took them different lengths of time, and like they were all different. So there was a few cookies that really ran well. One that I can remember that was a really special plant that I got to wash was a Sunday Driver. I'd never washed anything with that kind of flavor or potency like together. It was phenomenal. But we mostly just worked with like gas strains, man. It was stuff what yields and what gets people really fucked up. That was kind of like the way that I looked at things. Of terps are cool. I like terps. We all like terps, but like for me, the effect was the most important thing at the time. Was like I need to make sure that people are getting blasted off this. And a lot of times it was like Death Bubbas or like Lindsay OGs or pinks, stuff like that. That were just like you could find them. They weren't crazy expensive, but you knew that you were going to get something that melted really well, tasted good, and people weren't going to be disappointed when they finished the jar.
Was it you sourcing those selections, or did you have somebody else that you trusted bringing you material that knew would work well?
So when I was doing, so like I said, I had my own drops and I would source that material. And when there was drops I did for other people, like I ran a ton of hash for Kind Selections from probably 2016 to 2020, really 2019, 2020. And he always was bringing me different flavors, which was really cool. I got to work with, I mean, we must have ran 50 to 60 different varietals during that time. And we were blending hash, we were blending washes, like we were just experimenting and having fun. And again, like I'm really lucky to have met these people that kind of their BHO programs sponsored all of our hash R&D. So, it was really blessed to be able to just be like, well, here's all this gear, like let's see what happens, and it's like, fuck yeah, like let's go, so that for me, like that's just like that's the ideal situation. Nobody is going to get those kind of situations, I don't think, anymore. Like it's so hard, the money isn't the same anymore. Like it's just none of it's the same. You can't just like throw away money anymore, right? So it was really cool for those guys to put their trust in me and really just like allow a hash program, R&D program to exist, really. So shout out to those guys.
Big shouts out to those guys. I mean, that's so cool on so many different levels. When did you get into edibles?
So like I said, my partner, she went through baking pastry art school. She was just doing that and then went and worked at a couple of bakeries for a while, like commercial bakeries and stuff, and just fucking hated it there. And I was making enough money doing what I was doing that like I was kind of just like, yo, like quit that shitty job. Like you don't have to be there, you don't even really need you don't need to be there anymore. You can kind of do whatever you want. So she started working on a gummy recipe. It took a few years to get it really perfect and to where it is now, but the R&D phase of that was kind of how that all started. She was making gummies from distillate because we didn't want any cannabis taste. It was just, this is perfect, easy to dose, 99.99%. It's the easiest math you could ever do. So we were making a bunch of distillate bears, and those were kind of all going out as like, they weren't really like under a brand at all. They were kind of just for people. But that kind of gave us the time for her to actually dial in that recipe and really, really get it, the texture perfect, the flavors perfect, and everything like that. That was really a blessed time to be able to develop that. So I guess like fast forward to 2020, right before the pandemic, I guess we were looking at like March or so, was right when the pandemic happened. So I guess it must have been just after that. So essentially I was, the guy who rented me the space out under his mum room had another facility down the road that was an actual flower facility. And it was a big warehouse, and I was working in there, and he was renting that from this old Italian guy. And when COVID hit, this guy was just like, fuck it, I'm out of here. So he sold all his property and we had to go. So my lab got shut down. I still have my equipment and everything, but just finding real estate out here was basically impossible at the time, price wise, and versus how much I would have to work to actually pay that off and everything without having a car and all these things. There was just a million roadblocks for me to open a new lab up. So I approached her and was just like, "Hey, do you want to start an actual brand up and, like, let's really like start pushing these things out and let the world see it, right?" Um, she was like, "All right, cool." So we started doing chocolates with distillate, and that was like maybe probably the first like 6-8 months. We were doing like really high end chocolates, but they were all with distillate in them. Again, to kind of get rid of the flavor and make them affordable for people, because hash isn't cheap, and it's something I wanted everyone to be able to have, or at least be able to afford to have. So we were doing it that way. Um, and then I started seeing Solventless Mind from down in the States was making these rosin gummy cubes. And I was like, man, I bet those things just like crush people. And then maybe a year or so after that is when I first started to hear about Vanspan, and he was getting these rosin cubes made. And shout out to my boy Chase. He's the guy who linked me with that first little bag of gummies. And instantly my brain was just like, oh, well, I have to fucking start doing this now, because like there's no way I could go back to eating distillate. Like there's just no way. This is by far a superior product. It tastes better. Everything was better about it. So that's kind of where snack season was born, I guess. Keeping the season name, so it was easy for people to make the connection, but something a little bit different, because it was a little bit different. So started putting hash in them, using Vanspan hash. Shout out to my boy North of Nine. He also provided one of the first batches for us to do R&D with of hash. So again, people have just been really gracious and thoughtful and kind, and really just believed in us and thought that, maybe if I get in on this, we can make something really cool. So we started doing that, and we already had the gummy recipe, so it was basically just adding a different input. And the rest is kind of history. People are starting to really enjoy the gummies now, and I can't sleep if I don't eat those. So they're very much a medicinal part of my life now.
How quickly was the positive feedback? I mean, in the cannabis community, coast to coast in Canada, which I have traveled, and can confidently say, snack season and melt season edibles are known to be some of A, the hardest to get, and B, the highest quality, both in flavor and effect. Like, how quickly was that positive feedback from the market felt upon releasing? Was it chocolates you first released?
Yeah, so we didn't do chocolates first with the hash. We actually did the gummies with the hash first. When you mix chocolate and hash in my opinion, in any decent usable dose, it just amplifies the taste of the hash like 100x. So when you get, like, for instance, rosin heads, I've never had one of his stronger ones, but when you go to get the ones from the store, they have no taste, and they taste really like it's not that they have no taste; they have no taste of cannabis, because they're not allowed to be that strong, right? So that's where those products are really, really important, where you can actually have this delicious chocolate, and it's really well made and perfectly done, but you're not getting this like harsh cannabis taste. And even if you're using delicious live rosin that's like, amazing to smoke, you're still decarbing it. Like, you're still kind of ruining the flavor of that product by cooking it in the oven to decarb temps, right? So I always just found that hash and chocolate, unless it's a really high dose and it just blows people's like minds, essentially, they don't want to taste that hash flavor. With the gummies, it's a little bit easier to hide with the fruity flavor of the gummies, and each gummy isn't dosed that high. So when you make like 100 milligram chocolate, it's obviously, you're going to taste that. Whereas if you make like a 20 milligram chocolate or a 10 milligram chocolate, it's not really going to have the same crazy amplified taste. And I don't necessarily hate the taste of rosin or anything like that. Obviously, it's more of feedback I've got from the community.
How quickly did you start getting positive feedback around the snack season edibles?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't even answer that. I would say it was not immediate, but it was within a few batches, like probably within 3 or 4 months of us like dropping rosin gummies. People were like, "Oh, these are clearly much different than what we're used to." Um, they're a little bit more expensive, but you don't need to eat as many of them. Like there's a difference between buying 200 milligrams of distillated versus 200 milligrams of hashish and eating that. Like I was eating up to 500 milligrams of distillate at a time to get like to the point where I was like, okay, I can fall asleep now. Whereas off of hash, if I take a tolerance break for a day or two, I can eat 50 milligrams and I'm just as high and sleeping. Without the hangover, without the belly rot of like having a half gram of distillate just rotting in my gut. There's so many more benefits to it. But I think it was probably the second or third batch where people were like, oh, this is for real. Like this is actually something that we want. But again, I've always believed in really small batch products. Like what in the world that they make millions of is awesome. Like I just can't think of any. Like you go to a car dealership and there's Ferraris in there. There's only a couple. You go to a Bugatti dealership or a Rolls Royce. There's only a couple in there. They're all handmade. They're all, there's a reason those things are the way that they are. And it's the inputs, it's the people behind the products, it's the branding, it's all of it put together that makes them the way that they are. And I think if we hadn't have branded snack season the way that we did, I think it maybe would not have done as well off the bat because of the price. But again, my girl's an artist as well. She's done all of our artwork for the brand. She's done all the berry pictures and the Boba Fett's and all the different fruits and all the stuff that we've done. And I really enjoy like getting to play. I get to play every day, which is awesome. And having someone that I can just be like, hey, I want this flavored gummy, or I wanted this picture for this flavor, and she can just whip it up out of nowhere. It's extremely valuable part of our business for sure.
Do you enjoy that creative process, or would you rather be in the lab making and creating there?
Oh, I very much enjoy that process. I think being in the lab is awesome. I love being in the lab. I love being alone in the lab. I love having some music on or a podcast and just being able to kind of be in my own element. I very much enjoy that. But I think the creative side of things has really opened up my mind as far as like, culturally, this doesn't have to just be medicine. This doesn't just have to be weed. It doesn't just have to be hash. This doesn't have to be anything. It can be a full experience. It can be a brand. It can be something where people are like, oh man, I wish I had a t-shirt with that on it, or I wish my hat had that logo on it, or, for instance, like you can kind of see here, I've got a bunch of our stickers kind of all on my torch here of just like different drops we've done. And this is kind of run out of space now, so I probably need to start a new one. But it's an experience for people to just be able to have fun. And, like we did a giveaway of like, oh, you want to take one of the stickers off of your packages and go and slap it on a stop sign or something and take a picture of it and send it to us. And we do a giveaway or something like that. And I just think like interaction with your community and with your customers is so important, and it's so much more than just here's a jar or here's a bag.
I think you've done a really good job. I mean, I think it's resonated tremendously with the community. I mean, you said it yourself when I mentioned to you offline that you were the most requested interview from the Canadians. It was, I haven't even made hash in a year or more, but it's cool that, I'm still remembered. So I think, hats off to you for executing on that and really creating a lasting impression.
Oh, thank you, man. I really appreciate that. And I think a lot of that honestly comes down to just doing good business with people. Like if I ran someone's hash and it didn't return, I'm not charging them for that. Like, it's we're all taking the L. It's not going to be a one-way thing if that's what it is. And when we win, we all win together. I just think if you're someone that's like up and coming and you're trying to get into business or you're trying to be a processor or whatever, like, just know that the few dollars you're going to get by screwing somebody over or not doing the right thing or whatever it is never, ever, ever worth it. And it's never going to get you to the place where you want to be. Doing good business is the only way. It's the only way to do it. It just is.
100%. So before,
and I mean,
go
making
ahead.
good products. That's obviously important too, right? I was just going to say, and obviously making good products too that people find value in and want to consume. Because if you don't have that, you can be the coolest guy in the world, but if you don't have good shit, like, you're just a cool guy.
Absolutely. So before I go into Canadian legalization and your sort of point of view and opinions on that, as well as plans moving forward, I want to talk about, take a dive into your lab, because I know from talking to you now, you've spent a tremendous amount of time in there, and just kind of go through some theory and some opinions you have on resin. So first of all, let's start with melt season. I mean, clearly you have a preference to consume melt over rosin. I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into the theory around that preference. Do you feel as though there are things that are lost in that press that are crucial in the enjoyment of that overall experience, or is your preference for, based on another reason? Like, I'd love to kind of dive into that first.
Yeah. So honestly, preference wise for me, it's purely based on power. If you take, let's say you've got Gelato 45, okay? If you take that Gelato 45, and I've actually never run Gelato 45, so maybe this isn't the best example, but if you take that Gelato 45 and it has true melt, like I'm talking 93 to 95% plus melt factor to it, like there's almost nothing left. I don't think you're going to find a better experience than that in cannabis. There's people that are going to say, "Oh it doesn't taste good," or it leaves a little bit of stuff on the nail and blah blah blah, whatever there is. It's like, okay, like that's just not for you then, and enjoy rosin because it's a great product. But anything that is really good in life, it's not supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be something you do because you love it and something you do because it's benefiting you in a way that other things aren't. I've had this argument with people before where they think rosin is better because it's maybe a more pure product or whatever, but I would argue the opposite, as I want something that's been as unadulterated as possible. And for me, I prefer full melt even over dry sift, purely just because I think what you're losing in the air from dry sift is more than you're losing in the water, strain depending on full melt, like water hash. So I've always been partial to melt, and maybe that's because I started with melt. There was no rosin when I was, first started smoking full melt hash. I think there is something missing. I think there's something happens when those wax cuticles bust open for the first time that is special, and I don't think you're ever going to get that by smoking rosin, personally.
Can we touch a little bit on your opinions around air dried versus freeze dried melt as it pertains to quality?
For sure. Would I say that the quality is different? No. Would I say one is more enjoyable than the other? And this is all generalized opinions here. I don't think you're going to find much of it. If you were to blind test people, I don't think they're going to notice much of a difference. Now, when it comes to certain strains, if you're growing sun grown, and then, like, for instance, like pineapple, If you ever smoke any of his sun-grown gear, it is phenomenal. And I would almost prefer to see that air dried over than freeze dried, because there's never been a machine involved. That's just the earth and the man. I think there's something special about that. Now, when it comes to commercial facilities, when it comes to lab testing, when it comes to all these things, like obviously you can't really run I don't think you can really run a viable air dried facility if you have to do all those things, testing, etc. All those things. It's going to be very difficult, and I'm sure it can be done, but it's not going to be like a regular thing. It's going to be a specialized thing. I believe that. Yeah, I just don't think there's a big difference. I know people will complain about, in the freeze dryer, when you take that little bit of water out off the walls or whatever of the freeze dryer, and there's a little bit of terps in that water. I'm like, okay, well, where did the terps go on the air dried stuff? Do you think they just magically still there? Of course they're not. If you can smell it, it's left. It's already gone, right? So I don't really get those opinions, really. They don't, logically, it doesn't make sense to me, I guess. Now, do I believe that there's something happening under vacuum that is not happening in the air? Potentially. But I think that's a time sensitive thing, as opposed to just every time you freeze dry, you're just losing stuff. You can use those space trays or whatever Archive has invented, that are those little dry sift screens, basically, that you put in your freeze dryer, and you can cut your wash or your dry time down to 6 hours with those. So what are we talking about here? Are we actually losing more terps, or are we losing the same amount of terps? And do we even want those terps in the first place?
I mean, that can lead us naturally into a fresh press conversation. What are your thoughts on fresh press? Is it something that you prefer, or do you lean more towards cold cure? I'll kind of let you take it from there.
I don't enjoy fresh press. Again, being somebody that's super allergic to those monoterpenes, anything that's not being cured a little bit is just a nightmare for me to ingest. I can't even stress how hard it is for me to dab fresh press. For the most part, I mean, I'm sure there are strains out there that, when you get them in fresh press, they're awesome. I used to think that fresh press was the way to go, because you would get your customers the product and they could cure it themselves and they could do all this stuff. But I soon realized that just in general, people just don't care. They just want something. They just want something that's just ready to consume, for the most part. And I think for that point, I think cold cure, maybe, I don't know if it's better or worse. I think it's really a subjective thing. I personally enjoy a cold cure, an actual cold cure, not a sweaty, heat mat tech or any of that bullshit. I'm not into that. And again, just my opinion. I'm not saying it's better. I'm not saying it's worse. Why are we heating this shit up again? I already heated it up to press it. We're going to heat it up again now? What are we doing? But then I've seen people test their stuff and they get more terpenes and things happen, right, from heating it up. So personal preference, I want something that's been either cured at room temperature or slightly below for, at least a week or so. That's my favorite way of taking rosin in, I guess.
Do you feel as though you can achieve the same level of quality of a cold cure by handing somebody a single gram of fresh press who's knowledgeable and letting them cure and whip that single gram of fresh press out, versus taking, say, a 2 or 4 ounce jar of that fresh press, letting it cure in itself, whipping that up, and then serving that gram out? Do you think those 2 grams are equal?
That's a good question. I think the 1 gram, put it this way. I've done experiments where I've taken, this is just a small jar, there's some ISO in it, but I've taken jars this size, right, that are maybe half full of rosin. And then I've taken big ass jars and cured them. And there is definitely a bit of a difference. With the same material, the same run, the same wash. I think that the amount of air that's in here is important for the cure. So if you have too much hash and not enough air, I think there's an issue. Or not an issue, but you're not going to get the same product over and over again. I think there's no reason those 2 grams can't be equal in a blind test. But I think that something is happening when you have more hash in a jar than less hash in a jar. And I don't know if that's just it's sitting in its own stink for the right amount of time, or whether it's the terpenes. There's enough terpenes in that jar to stay because it's it's more. I also think that if you had a single gram, depending on the jar, it's going to be tough to, other than just seeing it kind of coagulate, it's going to be tough to really know when it's done. Whereas with a big jar, I think it's easier to tell.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair assessment. With your experience processing, sun-grown dep and indoor resin, are you able to make any type of assumptions or observations as far as seeing the same cultivar run inside, indoor, and outdoor? Do you see a larger? Do you see the resin fall in consistently larger bags in the outdoor, or is that not an observation you've ever made?
I think that light dep, properly done, is the best way for you to get a really great expression from your hash. I think you're going to get the smallest wax membrane from light dep, but also the cleanest resin overall because you're not actually outside. I've run outdoor plants that made really nice hash, but it was dirty. What are you going to do? You're a road, or a fucking storm happens, or whatever. There's a million variables that you have to now deal with when you're looking at pure outdoor. Indoor, you obviously can control all the variables, but now you're not using the sun. And I do think that there's a difference between the sun and any light, at least on today's market, as far as what it can do to the trichome, what it can do for the flavor, and in a spiritual sense, the fact that it was grown with the sun. Like, what could be better than that? It's natural. It's as natural as it could possibly be. It's unadulterated. It's the way that it would have been done 1,000 years ago. It's just, I find there is something special with that. But as far as, bigger heads or smaller heads, I don't know if there's a difference between that necessarily. I think the difference is going to be in the actual amount of oil versus wax cuticle per head. And that's what the difference is between the sun and your indoor grows.
Do you have a preference or any observations that you've taken over the years on salt versus organically fed cannabis and how that relates to the resin?
So I was always very much a believer of, like, you know what, salt is not better than organic. Organic is the way, organic. That's always been my mindset until very recently. I recently tried Gas Gods, and this is not a hash thing. This is a flower thing. So I don't have the hash answer for you, I guess. But as far as flower goes, I think it is very much strain dependent. I think it's very much the user inputs and who is doing it. If you were to give the same guy, or the same, like, let's say 5 guys, the same program, they're all going to do something a little bit different, and all that flour is going to taste a little bit different. So whether it's in organic or whether it's in salt, I think it really comes down to the person and their specific program and regimen. But what I was going to get at was the frosted fruitcake from Gas Gods. They did a batch that was organic. Tried it. It was really nice. Like, some of the best flour I had smoked that year. And then he came back to me a few months later with a cocoa grown, the same flower, the same cut, and it was exponentially better. So I don't know, again, and I'm not a grower, so, forgive my ignorance on that end, but I don't know that anyone can say that one thing is better than the other as far as that goes. I think it's all very much just the other variables that make it what it is. I don't think you can grow the best weed every time in organics. I don't think you can grow the best weed every time in salts. I don't think you can grow the best weed every time with general hydroponics. I think you need to have a system that's really dialed in for each strain. And I think that the more people experiment, the better we're going to all be because of it. And respect to all those guys that are trying this stuff and saying like, oh, we did really good with this, but like, fuck it, let's throw it in rock wool this time, or let's use a different kind of tea this time or something to just try it. Because without that, we'd be in Stone Ages still,
100%. I wanted to ask you about pulling melt. When you go to pull melt, are you doubling up on any of your bags? And what type of bags do you like to use? Are you agnostic or do you stick with one company?
So for ease of use, most of my career I used Fresh Headies because my lab was right down the street. I could walk into the store, I could buy the gear, and it was just right there. I didn't have to ship anything. If I ripped a bag halfway through my day or whatever, I could just go buy another bag. It wasn't a problem. That being said, over the years, I've noticed the quality has gone down dramatically in that specific brand. And I mean, I'm sure there are still people that have bags from back in the day that are really good still and everything. But as the years went on, the bags that I was purchasing from them had definitely, the quality had gone down for sure. Like I've had, I like to use a wash bag, like the all mesh wash bag that goes into either the machine or into the bucket. I just like a cleaner workspace, and I don't like shit just floating around everywhere. And I was having like, after a day of using those, the zippers are like coming apart. And I'm like, well, what the hell? So I go back to the store and they'd be like, holy shit, like, sorry, whatever, and give me a new bag. But it's just like, there's definitely issues with not trying all the different brands out there. Our first bags, like I said, were bolt bags. I didn't know what I was doing at that point, so I can't really speak on the quality of those so much. I'm very interested in the all mesh. I think Resin Evolution does an all mesh. I think Bolt Bags also does an all mesh. But probably the best bags that I've used are the ice extract bags, the Bugatti bags. The quality on those is unmatched, in my opinion, from gear that I've used. I like the fact that they aren't using traditional. Well, they're not using only traditional micron sizes, which is cool. You get to experiment with like 104s and different size bags, which I really appreciate, and I like that kind of game of experimenting and playing with that. So I would say the best bags that I've used are definitely the ice extract bags to date, anyway.
And are you preferential to washing in cubes versus doing like a naked wash?
I do prefer to use not necessarily a cube shape, but some sort of 220 mesh bag that my material goes in. That is for sure the way that I like to do it. Makes cleanup easier. It makes my pulls cleaner. I found that to be the best way to do it. And I know there's a lot of people that hate cleaning those bags out, and that's probably why they don't use them. But like, I mean, you got to clean something. I'd rather clean this mesh bag than all my equipment every single time and scrub the shit out of it all because there's just like plant matter stuck to it. So for me, those little pillow bags are by far the best way to keep your plant clean, at least in like a brute or in a small washer.
And what is your thoughts around the water movement? Are you very particular about how you're moving that water around? Do you feel the separation happens at a certain point in the exchange, or do you feel more that the general vortexing is what's making that separation happen?
I think the separation is actually happening mostly because of the temperature. That's probably a bit of an unpopular opinion, but I mean, I've taken jar tech where you're doing a test wash and I've not shaken it at all. And if you just leave it there long enough, the hash falls off. So, I think that's going to be strain dependent. That I think that it's definitely one of those things where you can't just like put a blanket over it and be like, this is how the best way to do it. When I'm hand mixing, I'm absolutely switching directions, but I'm doing it in the least violent way possible. I like to let the resin basically stop moving, all the flour and everything stop moving before I switch direction. I'm not trying to just like thrash around in a bucket ever. Like that's not the way. So do I think that going one way is better than going two ways? No. And vice versa. I don't think two ways is better than one way. I think if you have the correct temperature and the correct flour, you can almost do nothing and you're going to make phenomenal hashish.
So by that line of thinking, does ice need to be present, or do you feel that could be accomplished iceless?
I don't think ice needs to be present at all. Ice is obviously great to cool the water down, but I think if you had, and again, I've only worked, all the labs that I've worked in are like straight up DIY, like ghetto tech labs. Like I've never been in a space where that it was, legal setup type vibes. Like it's never been that. It's been in bedrooms and, cellars and just under people's rooms, like just random shit. Right. So I think I've been able to achieve really good quality products without having all these special inputs. That being said, it is much easier if you have those special inputs. So yeah, I think people are just doing a lot in order to make products that they don't necessarily need to do, but those things do make it easier for sure.
What about jams? Like, were you at all focused on post-process heat application, for rosin pens and jams and the like?
No, I'm not like against anyone doing that, but in my personal experience, the products that I've enjoyed the most, it did not have heat added to them afterwards. They're pressed at a temperature that was, obviously you're going to get all your resin out, but it's not like, I don't know, man. I don't love the idea of cooking resin unless I'm going to eat it. That's just kind of where I'm at with that. As far as rosin pens go, I'm not a pen user. I'm not somebody that like uses pens or any kind of disposable vape cartridges or anything like that. I don't find the hit off of them is what I want. I don't find the flavor off of them is what I want, and I'm not really into just like throwing stuff away all the time. It just seems like a really convenient thing, which is cool. And I'm not downing anybody for that. It's just not the way I like to take my meds in. I think if you wanted something on the go and you want to consume rosin, go get a Puffco Proxy or go get something like that where you can be on the go and actually take a dab, where you're not having some coil or something heat this stuff up and then you've got like partially decarb shit in your card and whatever. I don't know. It just seems like a lot can go wrong. And coming from selling a lot of those things, I'm sure the tech has gotten much better since 2013 or whenever, when I was selling vapes and shit at the bong store, but like I wouldn't trust any of that gear that I was selling with my lungs today. Like G-Pen coils and shit like that. Like that was just horrible tech. But it worked and we all used them. I used them, like I'm not better than anybody else. I was smoking that shit too. So I just think that there's better ways to take in meds than a pen on the go, I guess. And like berries, it's a great way to do it. Like that's kind of one of the things I'm always sticking berry stickers on, like no smoking signs in the park. Cause it's like, oh, you can't smoke here. Well, I'm going to still be high. So, this is going to work. No one's going to know. It's going to be awesome. And you're going to get blasted and it's going to last a good amount of time. And, it's what I'm looking for anyways in a buzz for sure.
Yeah, no, those berries are incredible. I remember when I was first introduced to them, and it was one of the more pleasurable experiences, and it hit like a ton of bricks. So it was everything that I was looking for.
I think,
Um,
but honestly, with the berries, it matters. Like people think you can just put bullshit food grade into edibles just because it's hash that it's going to be good. You're not right. Trust me. If you want to put a full batch of 45U and that's all you're putting into your edibles, it's going to suck just like 45 does to smoke. If you want to only put 220 and 160 in there with that's messed up and whatever, it's going to be that. That's what you're going to get. Um, so I think we pride ourselves the most on the inputs that we're able to use. Luckily for me, I have some good relationships in the cannabis community, and I'm able to source, in my opinion, some of the best food grade that there is. And I don't even really like calling it food grade because I would smoke 95% of what we put in our edible. Tastes good, it smells good. A lot of it either second press or it second wash, full spec, like full spec, not select full spec. Um, and that's another thing too, right? It's like you get exactly what you put into those products. Same with the rosin pens, same with any of that stuff. If you're just putting crap in those products, people are going to know, and they're not going to buy it. And that's another reason why we can only make so much of what we make, because there's just not that much Heavenly Days, Gas Gods food grade around. Like it's just I gotta wait for hash to be made before I can make berries, right? So we've done lots of cool collabs with other people. I'm not saying they're the only ones that make good stuff. Like I've made some awesome collabs with like Van Egyptian. We've done cool collabs with Pineapple. We've done collabs with Vanspan. Um, but I just keep finding over and over again the berries that I want to eat are from that food grade. And again, I'm calling it food grade, but you know what I mean.
yeah. No, we need to develop a better term than that, I think, as an industry, but I completely understand what you're saying. And the quality
We'll call it berry grade.
Yeah, berry grade. Quality in, quality out. I think you touched on it a little bit earlier, but I wanted to ask what your thoughts were on resin mixing. We're seeing a big rise of it in the community, both north and south of the border. A lot of competition winners are now blends. Is that something that you're a supporter of?
Absolutely. Like I was saying, I'd say probably 80% of all the gear I ran with Kind Selections was blended. Um, we always said it was blended. There was no like, oh, we made this new strain. Like, obviously, we didn't make that strain. Like, you know what I mean? You can't just breed things like that quick. It's impossible. But I think, and there might be some breeders out there that probably will have issue with me saying this, but I think it's like breeding light, poor man breeding, being able to mix flavors together. And you're obviously not going to get that same exact expression when you're actually breeding. And maybe you would if you did a big enough selection. But I think that being able to mix strains, like, why not? Why would you not want that? I'm somebody who likes to take like a flag of melt of one flavor, and then I'm going to take some rosin and I'm going to like put it in the middle of that flag and make like a little taco, and I'm going to smoke that, and it's going to be better than both of them were on their own. I think there's people out there that are purists. They only want to smoke one thing. They want to know what it is, and I totally get that. And I've been like that as well in the past. And when I'm trying something new, I do want to try it on its own. I want to know what it's like on its own and its own flavor and how the resin falls and what kind of yields you're going to get and everything like that. So there is an R&D aspect to blending. It's not just like, oh, we'll just take these two flavors and now we got a new flavor, because like you're probably not going to make something good every time. But I know we had certain strains that were dumpers. We had Lindsay's that were really good. There was a Russian Stomper that great yields, and people only want that flavor for so long before they get bored. So now we can take a sour ambrosia that's like a barely 1%, washer, and I can actually wash that with something else, and you're going to get some of that flavor in there. You're going to get a little bit of that effect, and you're still going to have really beautiful hash or really beautiful rosin. It's just not. It's using your genetic library to the fullest like expression that it could be used. You know, shout out to all the guys breeding. Without you, there would be none of this going on. We wouldn't be able to have new strains. We wouldn't be able to do this new stuff. But that takes a long time if you're doing it right. It takes a really long time. Like if you're doing a 100, 200,000 plant selection, like how many months or years are we talking about before you get the keeper or the new thing, right? So in that time, we can actually just play and have fun and do things. But I think if you're doing it and you're not telling people, that's kind of messed up. Like transparency is definitely, it's important. You can't just be like making up strains or making up, well, yeah, this is the blue whatever, and it's just like, okay, cool. Like what actually is it? And it's like, oh, well, it's actually just like Blue Lotus and Death Boa we mixed together or something. It's just like, well, why didn't you just say that? Just it seems like you're hiding something, even if you're not. So just be transparent. Tell people what you're doing, and if they like it, they like it. If they don't, you go back to the drawing board and you make some new shit.
100%. I think that's more than a fair assessment. I mean, I think that more wines, if not all wines available, are some type of blend. I could be wrong. I'm not a wine expert, but I think the majority of them are. And I think that we're headed to a place where we're going to have to start separating categories in competitions between blends and single strains. Or maybe we won't have to. It's very interesting because we're seeing a lot, and I love it. I think it's great. I think anytime you can make a new unique flavor experience that, we should explore it to its full extent. So I'm stoked on it.
I totally agree, man. And it was really cool.
Sorry,
I was
go
just
ahead.
gonna say it was really cool to see those. Eagle Clash was the last big comp, and what was it, like 3 out of 5 were blends?
Yeah.
Like if that doesn't tell you what blends can, I don't know what will.
Ego, Emerald, a lot of blending going on. Or sorry, not Emerald, Legends. Ego and Legends. There was a lot of blending going on. A lot of blending last year at Ego and Legends. So yeah, I mean, even Melting of the Heads, there was a couple of blends that placed. So it's really kind of coming into vogue, and cool to hear everybody's perspective on it. Sometimes there's those purists that are very much, I think Bird stands out as one who's like totally against blending. No blending. But yeah, it's cool to get people's opinions on it. I wanted to ask you about machine washing. We're seeing a tremendous amount of new commercial wash vessels coming on to the scene. Do you have much experience with any of those? Have you had the opportunity to use any or take a close look at any?
So actually, I guess I can talk about it now because my NDA has expired a few years ago. But when Whistler Tech was doing R&D on, I don't know which version I got my hands on, but Bubble Man actually brought down one of the first Whistler Tech units for us to try and play with or whatever. It was a big stainless unit. It was basically 2 main parts, if I remember. This was years ago, so forgive my memory here. But it was stainless. It was like, I don't know, 4.5 feet tall, maybe. I think it was like a 200-gallon drum, something like that. And it had just like a little catch basin, like a little catch on the bottom where you were supposed to collect the hash. So it was like basically just like a jar that went under. If you picture like a funnel, there was just like a jar that would like screw in under the funnel, and that's where you were supposed to catch all the hash or whatever. Needless to say, we destroyed about 10,000 fresh grams in that machine, and it was not at all viable for what we were trying to use it for. It gave me some ideas, and it was really a cool experience to be able to like have my hands on like a prototype and be able to play and kind of see what it was. It was a very expensive game that we played, but I mean, it is what it is. It's in the past. But yeah, it was cool. I think if I was ever going to start a brand, I would just want to hand wash simply for the fact that I want to be the one that's mixing the resin. Um, I think there's something special about human interaction with any product. My favorite products are handmade. My favorite foods are handmade. They're went out wild caught, or they're, I got a friend with a syrup farm, and he's making everything without machines and doing all this stuff, and it's the best syrup I've ever had. His honey is the best I've ever had. There's all these things that I just, maybe it's placebo, maybe there's something to it, but I personally feel the product is more special when someone's hands were involved, as a point to just like a machine spinning the resin. And trust me, you're never gonna hand wash millions of grams of resin. It's not possible. You're gonna break your back. You're gonna be messed up. It's gonna be a bad time. You can't just pull bags all day. Like there's a lot of good things about the machines. I just think the actual spinning of the resin, I would like to do myself. But I do like the idea of the top-down agitation. I like the idea of stainless. That's really proper and food grade and all that. And maybe in the future will try one of those machines, or try some product that came out of one of those machines, and it's going to blow me away, and I'll change my mind. But I guess I'm just kind of old school in that way, where there's something about a handmade product that I don't think you can attest for when you're using commercial machines.
So would it be safe to say a statement you would agree with would be that the quality level that can be achieved at hand washing is superior at this point in time to what can be achieved with machines?
Well, again, I can't say that for sure because I've never used.
Yeah, that's true.
Like the newer machines, right? So like I wouldn't just like blanket say there's no way that could ever happen. What I'm saying is, if you were the hash maker and I knew that you were in there breaking your ass to make this product and sweat into these buckets, and you were putting your blood, sweat, and tears into this, I'm more likely to purchase that product than something I know that was made in a machine. But that's just, again, that's a personal preference thing. I hope to be proven wrong, because my back would be, a lot happier about it for sure. Like we've set up like pulley systems to try to shake bags and all this shit just to like try to make it easier. But it's like, just get stronger and get massages. That's my, hit the float tank once in a while and, loosen that shit up, because I've always found melt to be, again, my favorite way to experience cannabis. And I mean, I've never seen full melt come out of a machine before, like true, like perfect full melt. So I guess until that day, I guess I have to say that I would prefer hand washed material.
That's a fair assessment, man. I want to ask you how much thought you've put into the yield numbers that our industry sort of fudges so often, as far as strain yields from wet or dry weight. Like, do you feel as though we need to come together as an industry and define what these yields and math that we're applying are, or do you feel as though that's never going to happen and not a useful kind of use of our energy? Like, what are your thoughts on the matter?
I think that so let's start here. If you and I have the same product, okay, we're both running, let's call it a death boa, right? We're both running the same product. You've grown yours, I've grown mine. Well, I haven't grown mine, but someone's grown mine. That wasn't you. And those two products are now going to get washed the exact same way. Why does it really matter what your yield is compared to my yield? Unless we are trying to run the same gear for yields. Like the yield of a product has never changed my mind on whether or not I wanted to smoke it. It's never changed my mind on whether I wanted to purchase it or experience that type of resin or that flavor or that smell or whatever it is. As a hash maker, you obviously need to make money or you can't keep going, right? But if you have a 2%er, right? You've washed the thing that's a 2%er, and that 2% is based purely off of rosin weight, not just hash. There's a price associated with a 2%er, right? There's a price that should be different, in my opinion, that's associated with a 10%. It's just
I would
supply,
agree.
you know?
I would absolutely agree with that. I think further market education might need to take place, but sorry, go ahead. I agree. I completely agree with that statement.
Yeah, no, but like you're right though. Further market does need to happen. We're at the beginning here. Like we have to keep learning, and we have to keep teaching people, and we have to keep expanding our own tech and repertoire of what we're doing. I just don't think that my yields matter to you, and I don't think that your yields matter to me. That being said, if you're going and you're going to go buy a cut from somebody and they're like, oh, this is a 20% drop or this is a 5% or whatever, and you're all stoked about it, unless you're growing the exact same way that they're growing, and unless you have the exact same inputs and you're washing the exact same way, why would those two things ever be the same anyways? Right? Like there's too many variables.
It's an interesting way to look at it. I think that in all industries, you kind of need meter stick marks to measure against one another, whether it be for commercial viability or a number of different reasons. But I get where you're coming from. I think that, my point of view is that we haven't factored in maybe the water weight or activity present in the material when it's being frozen. So, you have potential variability there. There's potential variability of, are these numbers being based off loose resin or rosin? And I think that, having these open discussions and kind of better identifying and specifying what we're talking about will ultimately lead us to possibly just less confusion and, potential altercations in the space. Like if somebody gives you a 7%er and then it comes back off the press at 4, there's going to be some questions, and nothing went wrong in the grow. There would be some questions, and then maybe what ultimately resulted was it was 7 full spec loose resin, but right around 4 off the press, and that wasn't communicated, and then there was some potential issues that arose. So I think it's always an interesting conversation to have.
No, I agree. It is important that we discuss this stuff. It's important that I don't think we all need to be on the same page, but I think we all need to be at least reading the same book.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. Definitely there is a commercial aspect to yields, and you obviously need to make money. You need to pay your investors. You need to pay your own bills. You need to eat. You need all these things to happen if that's your main source of income. I just think that at this point in time, there are so many variables between every single person that's growing every single cut and every washer that's doing this and that. Like, I just don't see how any of those numbers could ever be the same for anybody unless you're running the same program. So I guess, do I find value in those numbers? Sure. But I'm more interested in the quality of the resin than how much resin there is, I guess. Because if it's amazing resin, people are going to pay whatever it costs to get it anyways, right? Like that just is what it is. There are products that are better than other products, and better is subjective. I may love fruit strains, you may love gas, or I might love candy and you might only like sours or whatever, and that's cool, and we're both going to find value in different products in different ways. But I just think that until people are on like the same page of like, oh, okay, well, this guy's growing in salts and he uses this kind of water and this many lumens and, you know, temps in his room or this and that and this input and whatever. Like, I just don't see how you're going to have the same experience on two different levels. And you're right, the scumbaggery is real. People say they have a 10 percenter and it's a 5 percenter, and you're like, oh, what the hell? And they're like, oh, you just didn't do it right, right? That's another issue with my theory of kind of what's going on here. People just need to be better. Like, just be better people. If everyone's telling the truth and everyone's, you know, just trying to make the game better, we're all going to win. I've never seen people beef or get in trouble with each other that things have turned out good for either side. You know, it's like, you just be good to each other and, you know, be honest, and you're going to find that your relationships are going to be a lot better and your products are going to go a lot longer of a way, and people are going to at least respect you for being honest, you know.
100%.
But there is one thing I'll say about numbers. One thing about numbers, and this is something that is just like, since day one has infuriated me, is the 6-star, 5-star, 4-star. What kind of, like, what are we doing with that system? I don't understand why that is valuable. Nobody's like, oh, there's a little bit left, a little bit of resin and half a Q-tip on my dab. Well, if I take a gram dab, there's no way there's going to be a half a Q-tip of resin. It's not possible. So, you know, that's where I'm more interested in actually standardizing things. I think we should be using the gravimetric scale over a star scale that's completely subjective. I think that's ridiculous. No hate on anybody that created that or anything. I think it's ridiculous that in 2022 we're still talking about 6-star. Like, come on. Get the email out. Pardon?
I think gravimetrics makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and it's not a terp discussion. We're talking about the melt. Does it melt? How much does it melt? Okay, it melts this much? Okay, that's a 80% melt, and I really like the terps on it, or whatever. You can make a scale for terpenes or whatever, but it's all subjective. Like, I just hate the subjectivity of the competitions in cannabis right now. I don't like the subjectivity of that 6-star thing. Like, I think there's better ways that all of that can be done, instead of just like, you know, I like this and you like that. Do a terpene contest, or do a melt contest, or whatever, you know?
Yeah, I think that there's absolutely room, and there should be a melt contest based on gravimetrics. But I think that everybody who's hosting, participating, and attending in any type of high-end solventless or flower competition right now needs to understand that these competitions are very similar to figure skating competitions, where, yes, these individuals competing are being judged on skill, but at a very, very high level, and a certain point after everybody shows up at a certain level, the judges' human preferences and proclivities and preferences all tend to or come into play. And so if you're competing in the East Coast or the West Coast, or in this country or that country, over in Europe or in Canada or the US, all those things, and how many judges there are, who the judges are, how the judging is being performed, all these things come into play. And, you know, I think that they needs to be recognized as just that, as you know, a popularity contest amongst those judges, not you have the cleanest resin. Because if that's the game, then the game is gravimetrics.
Yeah, and I guess, like, again, I'm not trying to hate on any competitions or, you know, anyone that is doing anything like and I'm not saying you're saying that either. I'm just I guess it's like art to me. Like, I don't want to judge art. I don't think anyone should be judging art. I think if you look at a painting and you are mesmerized by it, that's amazing. Whereas the guy beside me might think that looks like shit, or that he doesn't understand it, or whatever, right? So, like, I look at cannabis that same way. If we want to compete, let's see who can grow the terpiest flower, or let's see who can have the cleanest melt, or let's see who can, I don't know, like whatever the competition is. Like I guess personally, I'm more interested in that information than just like, oh, people don't like Tangy this year, they like gelato, you know, like, oh, okay, like that's not going to change what I'm doing. I'm going to still just keep making the shit that I think is fire. And up to this point, you know, the community has agreed at least. So I guess that for me is just like, yeah, I think the subjective competition aspect, I don't find a lot of value in that for my own personal brand, I guess. But I would be very interested one day if there are people doing gravimetrics or terpene contests or whatever. And going back to terpenes, I think that there is going to be a time where people are going to look back and be like, oh shit, maybe we shouldn't have been dropping products with that high of terpene content. As somebody like myself who is very sensitive to terpenes, like I have to wash with a full face respirator and an air pack. Like I can't even be in the room. Like it has to be fully sealed around my face or there's big problems for me. I think that I'm lucky in that sense because I have to wear PPE. I think a lot of people that are making hash today are going to find out in the future that they should have been wearing masks too. I just think that we can't be breathing in high levels of chemicals, whether they're natural or not, without any kind of, you know, exposure issues in the future.
Yeah, I mean it's something we talk regularly about on the lives. You know, Mission Hill is full face. Canadian Dabs wears a full face. You know, a lot of these guys are definitely, you know, not looking to do any damage to their lungs, and you know, a lot of people can feel it. Some people seem to be less issues from it, but a lot of people can feel it after those long days in the washroom, just sort of in their lungs, the wheeziness. I wanted to ask you.
Oh yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say I legitimately can't even smoke or dab after a day in the lab, even with a full mask on.
Wow.
Like I just can't. I'm super, super, super sensitive, and it sucks because a lot of times you'll be in the lab and then you go to an event and everyone's like, "Oh, come have a dab or whatever," and I'm like, "Oh, I can't," you know. And they're like, "What do you mean you can't?" And I'm like, "I'll literally pass out if I take a dab right now," and like I'm not really trying to have that kind of attention on me in public, you know. So again, that's a big reason why the edibles are so awesome for me, because being in the lab for 10, 12 hours a day and still being able to use cannabis and not be suffering because of it, it's super blessed. And I just, if anyone gets anything out of this conversation, I just hope anyone that's working with cannabis, maybe not flower so much, but if you're making extracts, solventless especially, and you're not wearing some kind of filter to filter out the whatever is in the air, terpenes and chemicals and whatever's floating around in the air, like please consider doing that. Even if you don't think it's important, if you don't, whatever, like I do not want to see my friends and colleagues on respirators in 10 years, you know, like and who knows if that's going to happen or not, but I can't see, like a lot of these chemicals are like limonene, like it's a cleaning product. You know what I mean? You can't just sit over a vat of limonene and just inhale that. Like it's terrible. So I think the higher we get, and that is the game, right? More terps, more terps, more terps. I think there is a threshold that we probably shouldn't cross, but we definitely will cross.
Yeah. I want to ask you about your thoughts around the plant's ability to produce resin. Do you feel as though with this increase focused on breeding, that for solventless extracts specifically, that we're going to see higher yields than we're seeing in some of these big number plants that you know, I'm sure you've had experience with? Like, do you feel as though the plant can produce more than 8 or 10% resin off of fresh frozen?
Okay, so again, we're at that point of like the percentages, right? I've had very um, I've had very knowledgeable people tell me they've reached up to 20% from solventless, and I have no reason not to believe them. I've never had anything like that, but that's that is something I've been told from a very, very reliable source that everybody who watches this channel would know, that they've reached those kind of things. I've never seen anything like that. Do I think, in all honesty, a plant could have 20% resin on it? I do. Do I think all of that resin is able to fall off in the water? I do not. So I think, and this would be an interesting, this would actually be kind of an interesting experiment to do, would be to take some flour, wash it, and then dry that flour out, maybe in a commercial sized freeze dryer, and then have someone run that into BHO, whatever's left. I think that's a true representative number of how much resin was on that plant, because there's so much resin covering a plant that you can't remove in the water. It's like slime. It's stuck to they're not all trichomes, right? And that's why you'll see the difference in a BHO and a hash run, right? You'll see, like for instance, that sour ambrosia that we did for Kind Selections. We washed like 5,000 wet grams and got 2 grams or 3 grams of rosin back, like total. But he got 33% in BHO. So it's like, well, there's clearly, that plant is clearly covered in resin. It's just not viable for the process that I'm personally doing. So I think 8%, 10%, definitely not the max. But I don't know how high it could go, I guess. I'm not really sure on the exact how high it could go. It wouldn't be surprising to me if you could get 30% off of BHO run, though. Like, that wouldn't surprise me at all. You're literally stripping the entire plant. Like, why wouldn't you get, a decent yield off that?
Do you feel as though there's going to be a tremendous amount of innovation in solventless extraction technology over the next 5 to 10 years? Or do you feel as though we have the building blocks of what we need and what we're going to be using, and it'll just be perfecting those?
I think as far as innovation goes, you're going to see better technology. And when I mean better, I mean more efficient. But I don't think, coming back to melt, I don't think you can make better melt than you can right now based off of the technology. Because I still personally believe the best melt is made by hand. So, it's hard to say, I guess, how far we'll innovate. I think rosin is going to get innovated big time. I'm already seeing different kinds of presses that are coming out that are completely different from the presses that I, personally use. Like, I have a Sasquatch V2, completely different than that. I remember Tony Verzura talking about like an auger type of machine that would like feed flour or hash into like a machine that would like, just constantly press kilograms of this shit at a time. And like, that's super cool. I don't know if that exists or if that was just an idea he had, but I think we're gonna find a lot of innovation post melt processing. But as far as like trichomes falling off of plants in the water, like, that's just gravity. Like, what, we gonna invent new gravity? You know what I mean? But we might, I hope somebody does. It would be cool, man. Like, I think technology is awesome. I think, we wouldn't be here in the place we're at now without all that stuff. Like, if we were still trying to make rosin like they were back in the day by spinning a bag of flour over a fire pit, you know what I mean? Like, shit would suck compared to what we have right now. So technology is definitely our friend, and I'm definitely looking forward to what comes in the future. I just think that as far as full melt water hash goes, I don't know if there's going to be better technology than putting your hand in a bucket and, stirring a bag.
Do you see dabbing as a culture growing substantially over the next few years, or do you feel as though the vape disposable culture is going to take the majority of the spotlight as we move into future legalization?
I totally believe in dabbing as the future. I love smoking flower. I've always loved smoking flower. There is a certain ritual about rolling up a joint and smoking it, breaking it down, picking the stems out, picking the leaves out. Like it's a therapy that I don't think I'll ever replace. That being said, with the way that people look at smoke, with the way that people look at just combustion in general, I think that sadly, like like I'm in my 30s, my generation's kid probably won't be big on flower. Um, I think they're going to be mostly into extracts. I think that Puffco has done a phenomenal job of really making dabbing not look like meth. You know, you've got this little machine, you put your dab in and you just push it and it lights up and it's awesome. There's no blow torches. There's no like, you know, just like loud sounds or, you know, people blowing their heads off, like coughing, because now you've got a perfect little temperature machine that can take your dabs for you. And now that they have the peroxy, that thing's like you put that, you don't even need water. You just put it in your pocket, you go wherever you want. So I think dabbing is definitely the future. It's obviously the now, but I think it's definitely the future of consumption for most people, whether that's eating those dabs, whether that's vaporizing them on a like a Puffco type Carta or anything, you know, one of those smaller at-home machines, or even if it's just pens. Like I know a ton of people, you know, they're older. Yeah, exactly. They're a bit older or, you know, whatever, and they just want a light little hoot off a thing. And they don't want to taste weed. They don't want to stink like weed. They want the little buzz without all the other stigma attached to it. So I think definitely concentrates and edibles are definitely future. And even more than that, for actual sick people, I think that suppositories are truly the future for those people. There's so many people that I know that they just can't smoke. And they need the relief and they don't have the best stomach and whatever, or they've gone through cancer treatments or, you know, all these things. And, you know, as uncomfortable as it might be, they need that relief. And I think that's something that I'm excited to see people getting relief from cannabis in any way possible. Like my grandfather passed away 2 years, maybe just over 2 years ago. In his 90s, like, you know, church guy, not into cannabis, not into drugs, like anything, not into that culture, anything like that. My family didn't really know what I was doing work-wise for a long time. They weren't cool with it. It wasn't, you know, something that I was really wanting to share with them or anything. But when my grandfather started getting sick and was having trouble sleeping and everything, I just reached out and was like, man, I'll provide this for you. And I just got him CBD, just CBD tincture with MCT oil, like nothing crazy. He wasn't getting all stoned, but he saw the value in cannabis and saw the value in not just blindly listening to your doctor and, you know, taking your health into your own hands a little bit. And we got him off quite a few of the medications that he was on. He was able to sleep through the night. He wasn't getting up to, you know, take a leak 3-4 times a night. Like the guy's in his 90s, you know, you can't just keep feeding people drugs their entire lives that are causing more problems. So I'm just super grateful that he's, you know, he was able to find some relief in a cannabis product, even though he wasn't ever in the cannabis scene, didn't care about it, wasn't into it, like probably would have scolded me for even being a part of it at all. But being able to show him the way of that has kind of opened the rest of my family up to like seeing the value in that product. And it's not just, oh, these kids are just getting stoned or whatever, you know?
That's huge, man. That's huge. I mean, there's always that kind of catalyst moment for every family that looked at it one way and then kind of opened up. So that's very cool to hear. I wanted to ask you about, legalization. As somebody who is super well positioned in the legacy space and very well connected, what were your expectations and thoughts around legalization when it came onto the horizon in 2016?
I had ignorant hopes about legalization. I was told by a few people that Canada was going to be going to California and Colorado and other places that had kind of legalized a little bit, and they were going to go and look and see what they were doing there to make our system better when it started. That clearly never happened, and if it did, they didn't see shit that they liked, I guess. I'm just very confused as how, I just thought that they liked money, the government, and the way that they're going about it right now, they clearly are not into money that much, because if they were, they would not be doing things the way that they're doing them right now. These companies are hemorrhaging millions of dollars every year because they're losing out on product. People aren't buying their products. They're just not what people want, at least from what I'm being exposed to. I think that some of the flour has started to get a bit better, from what I'm told. Again, I haven't dabbled a whole lot into it. And now that we have some of the legacy guys, Slurm and like Brindle and Pineapple now, and a few of these guys that are starting to enter the legal market, I think we're going to start to see the quality start to go up, as long as their partners allow them to run the gear that they want to run, right? Because just like right, there's you got to make that money, right? You've got to be able to pay for these massive facilities. You got to pay for security. You got to pay for transportation. You got to pay the taxes. You got to pay all these bills, right? And I just think that unfortunately, they didn't set it up in a way where they would make the most money. In my opinion, the way that they could make the most money is charge anyone who wants one a licensing fee. If you want a license fee, whatever, 20 grand a year, 50 grand a year, whatever the number is, you pay that to the government, okay? They take that money and they do whatever they're going to do with it. What they should do with it is they should start building out testing facilities and consumption lounges and all these things and charging people to go in there if they actually want to make money. But I don't think that they do. I think that the way that they set it up, it was set up for them to be able to monopolize and take over the entire market in a quick sweep. But I think that they kind of realized, oh, people don't actually really want what we're putting out. And oh, these edibles are very expensive. Like, my edibles cost the same, like in the legacy market, cost the same for 200 milligrams as you can get for 10 milligrams at a store. And it's like, why can't they just make the money that way? What are they scared of people having actually proper dosed edibles? There is no, I just don't see, I don't see any logic behind the way that they've set it up today. You can't smell the product. You can't see the product. You can't label. You can't put stickers on your shit. Oh, because the kid might want that or whatever. But it's just like, have you ever been into a liquor store? Like, everything in a liquor store is attractive to a kid. They've got pictures on everything. They've got craft beers with cartoons on them and little characters and all this shit. And I just don't see why we aren't afforded the same, what's the word I'm looking for? The same opportunity to express ourselves and to make our brands something more than just like a plain bag. Like, who wants to buy this? Like, there's nothing in here. It's just, there's no soul in that bag, So I really just hope that they start to allow people to express themselves and express their companies and express their businesses and treat us like adults. That's just, I guess that's my hope for the future.
Yeah, it's a really tough position that they put us in, where they inserted themselves, the government, into the supply chain, and not where logic would tell, which would be testing for public safety, they privatized testing, and then they went into the supply chain and distribution side of things. And, you know, that to me was a very interesting move. I know Canada likes to be involved in business a little bit more than some other countries, but I really hope that that changes over the next few years. And I think that federal legalization in the US will prompt a lot of relaxation in Canada. I hope, at least.
I hope so too, man. I really do. And that's not even to say like I'm all for more people having access to cannabis. Whatever that is, like I'm for that. I am not for people getting taxed outrageous amounts of money to buy products. I'm not for monopolization of distribution, testing, stores, storage areas. Like all these things are government ran. And I just like, I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels this way, but like, who the fuck are they to tell us how to run our culture? You know, like, I'm sure you can tell by my story here a little bit that like I've never had a great, I've never been great at dealing with authority, which is definitely a big reason why I'm still on this side of the fence. And I just like, if there's not logic there to be seen, I can't be a part of it. So I think until I can actually have a brand that I can express myself and I can push the products that I believe are valuable and work with the people I want to work with, and people aren't getting taxed out of their ass multiple times just to have the chance to have some of my products, I'm probably just going to stick with the legacy side, man, because you know, the people on this side have always been here for me. They've been here for my family. They've supported us. And to me, that's the most important thing, is how do they feel about, you know, the products that they're getting, and are they finding value? Because I just, time and time again, I just hear people being disappointed with what they're purchasing on the rec side, and people that run the shops and people that work in labs and people in the testing, they're all just not happy with how it's going. That can only go on for so long, you know?
Yeah, it hasn't been a success story, that's for sure. I want to ask you, you know, did you have aspirations early on to make the transition? Were you approached by companies like so many others?
Yeah, I've had talks with a few different LPs, some of them being pretty big, some of them not being that big. And honestly, like, not that I don't have aspirations to go into that world. It just has to be the situation that makes the most sense to me. I know how replaceable people are. I know that once you give away your secrets, once you give away your tech, once you give away your recipe of why your brand is special, they're just going to take it. And, you know, why would they keep paying you this? Or, you know, you become disposable at that point. So I guess I do have aspirations of, like, I would love for my products to be in multiple countries. I'd love for my products to be accessible to everybody, but they're just not right now. And unless I do things that I'm not comfortable doing, or I align myself with people who I don't know and maybe aren't comfortable with, there's a good chance that's never gonna be the way, you know. So until then, you know, I'm happy to sit on the sidelines and watch, and definitely big respect to everybody who's jumped over there and, you know, tried to do it. And, you know, I know a lot of people that have got screwed big time and lost everything, and, you know, like, it sucks, right? Like, there's all these stories of all that stuff happening. And I'm just grateful that the market that I'm in has continued to support me and my family, and has continued to find value in what we're doing, because without that, there would be nothing, man. I'd be fucking selling sunglasses again, probably, you know.
I mean, the care and attention to detail is very apparent, you know, when you get a hold of any of your products. So I think that's really cool. And so, like, what are plans moving forward? Do you plan to get back into melt and rosin, or continue to focus on snack season and putting out edibles, or what are your thoughts around there?
Well, snack season's never going anywhere. I plan on having snack season around until the day I die. I've lost so many friends to hard drugs, bad decisions, alcohol, all these shitty things, and I just, if I can continue to help people, whether that's getting off of those things, whether it's starting up programs for getting off of opiates or whatever it is with hash, with edibles, because I've seen those things work. High dose edibles can definitely help people get off of hard drugs. I just think I think that that's here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. Anyways, I would love to have berries in every house in the country, down in the. I'd love to have them in the States. I've had people in the States reach out to be like, hey, how do I get your gear and stuff? So the word is spreading for sure. But I just think as far as edibles go, I would love to see them go on forever, and I'd love to have them in every corner of the earth. And I love the fact that her recipe is it's the one. It's the thing that's gonna allow that to be, because I've tried a million gummies out there and none of them are, I'm obviously biased, but none of them are anywhere near the quality that we're putting out as far as the actual texture of the gummy, the flavors, the little characters we have, and the inputs that are going into them as well. It would be really cool to be a general contractor for LPs, and set them up with their gummy programs, and have my hand all over the place. As far as hash room, I would love to get in the hash room again. I would love to set up a cold room again. But I'm very, very picky, especially now, with what I'm going to wash. So until the perfect situation comes about, I'll just be doing the edible thing. But that being said, like, I'm always here to answer questions of people, and if anyone has any, needs a hand with something, like I've helped a lot of people with like setting up their freeze dryers or setting their labs up and things. Like, I probably should charge people for that kind of shit, but whatever. It's just I wanted to see when this whole started. I just wanted more people to be able to get full melt hash. That was all I cared about, man. Like, I couldn't get it. I wanted everyone to have it, and once I finally had it, it was like, oh my god, like this is exactly what I thought it was going to be. I just can't imagine life without that now. So shout out to all the hash makers out there doing it. Like I said, there was definitely people making hash before me and long before I was, but I think that West Coast, our brand, really put that on the map for Canada and allowed people to have access to something that they weren't able to access before unless you knew somebody. Because even back then, bro, I'd go to CCHQ or I'd go to some lounge or whatever, and like you might see a guy with some hash or whatever, and I'm like, oh dude, like please, like can I just buy like a half gram of that? Like I just want to go home and like smoke it and like really get to know it. No, I can't sell you that. I'm like, bro, like I'll give you $100 for a half gram of that shit. I just need to like, I need it to be like, I just need to consume it in my own way, like how I want to consume it, and like know that I'm doing it how I want to do it, So I just want everyone to have access to the best products, and whether that's my products or there's other great products that are on the market, as long as the access is there, as long as it's not too expensive, as long as people can afford it, and as long as the people can afford to keep making it, right? That's a huge part too. Like, not everybody's like me where they aren't obsessed with money, like it's tough to convince people that money's not the most important thing, So I think by more people making hash, like there must be 150 hash brands in Canada. There was nothing before, like there was none. So I'm super proud that, we were around at the start of that, and we were able to inspire enough people to actually take the risk and go out and try it on their own. And a lot of them were BHO guys before, just like, you know, my partners were. They were BHO guys and they saw the light. And, you know, now Canada is a place where I think most cities you go to, there's someone there that has some really nice hash or some really nice rosin at the very least. And that to me is just like, that was worth everything, you know.
Did you think it was going to be that? Like, did you think it was going to happen and get to where it is today?
At first, no, just because of like how hard it was to get rid of it. Like, people just didn't understand what it was. Like, when you tell people you have hash, they picture a brick of brown hash, you know. They picture Moroccan or they picture Lebanese hash that's like pipe hash or something you would put in your joints or smoking a pipe or whatever. Like, they don't think of like, you know, white powder as as hashish, you know. So yeah, to be honest, at first there was never a thought of like, oh yeah, this is gonna blow up and like everyone's gonna want to have this in their pockets. Even though I knew I wanted it in my pocket, and my partners knew that that's what they wanted. We got a lot of pushback for sure. We just had to keep giving it away until people decided that it was something they wanted and they couldn't really go back. So big shouts to all those guys, man. It was it's a fucking ride, that's for sure.
That's wild, man. Is there anybody else that, you know, we didn't touch on that you might want to give, you know, a shout out to before we wrap up here?
I mean, there's a lot of people that I'd love to show some love to on here. Most of them probably won't see it because they aren't like in the scene so much. But as far as people in the scene, you know, again, big respect to guys like Vanspan, guys like Van Gyptian, guys like Pineapple, anyone that's doing air dried hash right now, still after all these years of freeze dryers being out and that being the standard, like, honestly, respect to all you guys, because if there wasn't that just love for those products wouldn't exist anymore. And going back to legalization, if the government had their way, there would just be, you know, crispy flowers on the market right now. And that's, you know, that's sad as far as culture goes. Like, that's super sad to me. So I think, you know, shout out to the West Coast boys. Without them, without, you know, signing us or picking us up, basically, I would have never got into this. Shout out to B for having the push to really go out and just buy all that shit that we needed to start running. Shout out to the guys who would bring us packs at the start. They know who they are. And honestly, just everybody that's ever supported us and ever seen one of my videos or seen a post or, you know, anything like that. Like, just, I never expected any of this to go the way that it did. And I'm sure the next 10 years of my life are not going to go the way I expect either. I just hope that, the culture stays alive, and I hope that people just really continue to care about the plant, care about hash. Like, you know, that's what we're here for. We're all here for the hash. And yeah, honestly, like, yeah, I'm probably forgetting a bunch of people that I should be shouting out, but, you know, come see me later. I'll make it up to you.
That's awesome. So where's the best place for people to find you if they listen to this or watch it online and want to get in touch with you? Mel, what's the best place for people to get in touch?
Yeah, just like Meltszn, my Instagram page. I'm pretty active on there. It's probably just the easiest way to go. I am a private page, so, you know, forgive the 400 plus people and trying to follow me right now. But if I don't know anybody that you don't know, there's probably a good chance I'm not going to accept the request, just based off of how many accounts are getting deleted and all these things that are happening these days. I've been very lucky to only have my account go down once in about 10 years. So I'm just really trying to keep it that way because I have a lot of contacts on there that I need. So Meltszn is a great place to get a hold of me. I guess if if you really want, meltszn@gmail.com. If you have some questions or for some reason I haven't accepted your friend request or whatever, I don't check that very often, but the notifications are turned on, so I'll know if I get an email. But yeah, other than that, just keep smoking hash, man. I'm not here to hate on anyone that smokes rosin only or whatever. I'm not that extreme with it or anything. But if you go on a pursuit to find really proper full melt, you will find it, and it will change your life. I can almost guarantee that.
Man, Mel, I appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate you coming on the show, sharing your story. It was really cool to chop it up with you. I really enjoyed it.
Oh yeah, man, anytime. And as the car alarms go off behind me here, yeah, like I said, bro, if you're ever in the city, and please don't hesitate. I got something for you.
Absolutely will. Absolutely will. I hope everybody enjoyed the show. Swamp Hash tomorrow. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Melting of the Heads, New York, January 20th. Few tickets left. meltingoftheheads.com. Appreciate everybody. Hope you guys have a great night and a great 2023.